follically challenged. So
Yeah.
when it comes to facial hair.
Yeah, it's not my gifting, that's for sure. I don't know what my gifting is necessarily, but
Minimize this.
You're the only academic in the room, so that's a gift for
Yeah.
I feel like that's a negative for a lot of people these days.
Well, I mean, we do have we did want other perspectives in the panel, right? So
yeah.
Sensei is in Japan and he knows a lot of Asian mythology, and that we figured that would be sort of a helpful perspective.
Yeah.
And Jack can come at it from the pagan perspective, so there's that.
And technically, we do have 2 Catholics.
3.
Technically, you were confirmed.
Yep.
Okay, then we have 3 Catholics.
There you go.
Yeah, I wrote. My mom is very Baptist now, but I remind her sometimes that all she needs to do is schedule a confession, and because she was born in Germany, she was baptized, went through confirmations. I'm like, you just gotta go talk to a priest sometime. You're Catholic, and she doesn't like it when I say that.
I wonder why, Chris. I mean, that was like the other day. I was in a small apologetics fucking fight with Phil. And he's like, you're 5 years away from being a Catholic again. And I'm like, that's the one I left first. What makes you think I'm going back there after 40 years?
Look, sometimes people circle back around, okay? I've seen that happen.
Well, yeah,
it does.
But if you spent any time with me, that ain't the one I'm going back to, especially when I consider the Catholic Church one of the basically most damaging criminal organizations in history. Yeah, they've done some good, but man, some of the shit they've done wrong.
Well, Dante would probably agree with you more than me, but he keeps putting my popes in hell, so.
Well, on the flip side of that, Dante was a believer, so that's why he saw the corruption and ineptitudes within the church. He saw the modifications happening in real time to the Bible and the translations that were happening. So much so that a Bible that was translated in Dante's era, we actually can see where the scribe was basically reprimanded for changing certain words and adding whole phrases. We actually have the head editor of the books notes in the margin basically saying stop screwing up. And he saw all that, and he took it personally, because to him, he was a true believer. He believed the Bible was the inerrant word of God that should not be manipulated or corrupted by man, and so on and so forth. That's going to affect a true believer worse than somebody like me. I believed back then, but I had doubts. He was a true fucking believer and got hit with that whammy.
Yeah.
Especially being so educated, he would have seen it even more firsthand than anybody else. Okay, let's get this here.
I really want to get, I probably will now that we're doing this, because there's some cheap ones. But the most recent modern library edition was translated by Anthony Eslin, who I like a lot. He's very conservative Catholic scholar. And he's one of the people that I'm hoping to ping and rope into this eventually, because I have vague connections to him. He doesn't know me super well, but I could probably convince him to talk about Dante when he's translated the whole Divine Comedy. But the modern library ones are bilingual, which is cool. I don't know Italian. I know just a little bit of Latin, but I thought it would be cool to have just the Italian on a facing page just to look at it at the very least.
Now I've got to find that link that I sent you. I thought I put in the group.
He did, yeah. I replied to it. So it's the post that I replied to.
Oh, yeah,
the PDF of this airs one, yeah. Yeah, it's a good find.
The translation that I like is Mark Musa, only because we used him in college when I learned it.
Yeah, that was the first one I read in college too. I haven't gone back and read the translation. I realized along the way that I kind of I really didn't like his notes as much as the Sayers one, so I've kind of been poisoned against it. But the Sayers translation is goofy. No one really likes it, but I do. I like it because I enjoy it. But the people who are Italian scholars hate it. So
right, because she departed from the style, right?
yeah. Well, she preserves the terzerima, but she does it by like making it very non-literal in places. She basically is just like, yeah, I would prefer. She's like, I don't think a prose translation catches what he's after, the kind of musicality of it, and I don't think that trying to shoehorn the same meter but different rhyme structure works. So I'm going to keep the rhyme structure. I think there's good enough translations in English that I can do that, and the Italian scholars that I know say no. So whatever.
No. I mean, it's absolutely right.
The old accuracy versus style.
Right.
Well, but there's because certain languages you just do not have the appropriate words necessary, because one language will commence an entire idea into a singular word, and others will extrapolate that singular word into paragraphs. Like, it's really hard to do that unless it is a similarly structured language. This is why a lot of people call all translations transliterations, because you are making choices.
Sayers has a really good in the intro of that PDF that Aiko linked. There's a good explanation of why she thinks English and Italian can pull off the work that she's trying to do. Basically, because one of the criticisms people have of translating things like Italian into English is that English sucks at rhyming, because we have so few clusters of distinctive ending sounds. And she says, one of the reasons for that is because we have really useful vowels in ways that other languages sometimes don't. But she's like, here, I think actually in English we can pull this off. And she does a side by side. She's like, here's an example of some big hitting lines from the text. Here's how this person translates it. Here's how I translate it. Here's what they're preserving about it, or here's the meter that they're choosing, and here's how I try to do it in English. And so I like having that side by side of her being like, here's how I do it and why. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I have, as you can see here, you guys can't see it because it's on the side chat, it's in the stream. But yeah, I have the two Divine Comedies, one by Longfellow, one by Sayers, set up by side.
Yeah, I've got I have the Longfellow. The only Longfellow translation I have is this nice classics, from Barnes and Noble or whatever. So I yanked that off the shelf. It's the only edition I have that has the Gustave Doré illustrations too, which are just obviously awesome.
Yeah, I had a lot of research setting up for this, and basically there's one camp, and they're all American, who want you to do Mendelbaum translation.
Yeah. Yes.
And I'm like, but every Italian, Latin scholar, French scholars, basically anybody who speaks a language even remotely connected to the original language says to avoid him like the plague.
Yeah. It's interesting. I had a conversation with there was this academic panel I went to recently, and it was just an eclectic group, but one of the conversations was on, it was two different scholars sort of the Renaissance and art history and politics and theology, talking about different eras of art, basically, in Italy. And you had one guy doing Michelangelo as sort of the epitome of art and the encapsulation of all of these things. And anyways, they were just having a good debate about translations and things afterwards. And I think one of them hated Mendelbaum and one of them loved him, and that was a big point of disagreement between them.
Honestly, the only scholars I can see who like him are people from American schools. That's it.
Yeah.
And I don't know why. There's never an explanation as to why him over Sayers. But what's funny is both the people who love Sayers and love Mendelbaum hate Ciardi. So,
yeah, I've heard. I haven't actually. I guess I haven't talked to many actual Italian scholars about it, but I've heard pretty good things about the Esalen translation, which is one of the reasons I want to get it. But also, I think he probably more than the translation. I think his notes would be useful because he's somebody who I think is really. You don't get a lot of people, I think, who really understand the medieval mind. Those are pretty rare today. It's hard to find any medievalists at all, and so he gets it, I think, and that's one of the reasons this Air is so good as well. Is just because she has that
the medieval mind to the best of our ability.
Sure, yeah.
This is one of those things that I get in trouble with scientists. Like when I start speaking a little bit too hard about things like history like this, it's like, well, we have records that show very different lives and very different mentalities of these people, yet it almost gets perceived as monolithic within a particular age or decade within an age. And it's like, that's not true even within a singular country. How the hell can we say that across entire regions? You know, like, that just does not seem to coalesce with what we understand of anthropology, especially not cultural anthropology. So, again, we need to be more finited and nuanced about this, much like we are with science, to the best of our knowledge, not this is. Because that ends up, unfortunately, even if we unintentionally do so, making us doing an argument from authority, which instantly puts us on the back foot. It doesn't necessarily make us wrong, but it puts us on the back foot. And with the medieval mind, like, honestly, one of the things I find interesting is the historians and the cultural anthropologists disagree so often. So why is it our physical evidence doesn't line up with our history books as often as it should? You know, and that's something we need to take into account in a lot of these things. You know, it was like I was doing something with City of God Against the Pagans, and I was like, wait a minute, this sounds weird. So I went back to the original translation, and yeah, the person who translated it just removed 3 Latin words because he didn't know how to put it together. Just completely removed it. And I'm just like, okay, I still don't agree with Augustine, but like, at least this makes sense now. Because it was to the best of that person's ability, yet those 3 words changed the whole fucking sentence.
This is what I like about putting the translation next to the original source, especially if it's something like Italian, which isn't that far away from modern languages, because then you can still read the English primarily, but when you want a little bit of clarification, you can go to the Italian and sort of like see.
I wish I knew Italian. I tried to get, there's a historian and linguist streamer I tried getting for this. Unfortunately, he never responded. I guess he's just too damn big to even respond to stuff like this. But there's a guy named Metatron, knows Latin, literally grew up in Sicily. So, like, I mean, knows both of the pertinent primary languages, plus knows Coptic Greek and ecclesiastical Latin. You know, so like, he would have been like absolutely fire for this. Unfortunately, could not get him. He's too busy yelling about the culture war and Yasuke being a samurai.
Yeah, I have a few friends who I have a few friends who bothered learning Italian. They did enough like Machiavelli for their PhD that it was worth it. But I mean, you know, I've learned enough words that are crucial to teaching Machiavelli, but that doesn't, no language competence at all.
I don't know if I'd want to reread The Prince after reading it once. I don't know if I'd want to try and do that in Italian.
Oh man, it's so fun. Oh, I think I've read The Prince more than any other book. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say I could put the Yasuke thing to rest right away. We're talking about, what is it, like Renaissance era, like Japan? He was given a name. That is a big deal.
Yeah, what I said to him, if he's not a samurai, he was a warrior of renown.
No. He was given a name, which means that somebody high up wanted him in his, as a retainer.
No, that all I understand, and that's what I'm saying. If he was not a samurai, even of the lowest order, he would have been essentially a very highly ranked man-at-arms, which still in that time period, highly valuable position within, daimyo households.
Well, yeah, no, but I'm just saying, like, if that were the case, he might not have been given a household, but he was given a household. He was given a household and a name and respected by a village. If someone doesn't call him by his name in that village, that person's going to die.
Yeah,
so anyone trying to try to debunk this thing would be like, dude, the dude was given a name.
Actually, the way Metatron did it, he pissed everybody off. He's like, first of all, you fucking woke idiots who are saying all this other dumb shit, shut up. And all you other people who are trying to say, oh, he was definitely a samurai. Well, we don't have records for that except for after his death. So he may have been posthumously given the rank. But what we can know is all the honors he was given during life. And that,
right.
And I'm like,
right.
That's intellectually honest. I may disagree with the way he worded a few things because he was a little too aggressive about certain things. But it's like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. That follows the evidence we have.
All I'm going to say is, like, people don't realize exactly how important it is to actually get a name. Because if you're given a name, especially if you're given a name and a family name, then that means you have to be respected by the entire village. Like, as a member of that village, like, there's no way you get around that. Like, somebody like says something against you, especially if you're more powerful, you're gonna die.
Hey, Eucharist, have you ever worked with the Perseus project?
I have not, but I'm familiar with it.
I wonder if there's something like that for Dante.
I do not.
You mean like have I ever used it? Yeah. That's interesting, actually.
Rich, elaborate.
Because
Perseus project.
Perseus project is like a Stanford project that takes basically every classical work in Greek and Latin, and it makes it so that if you were to pull it up, you would see. If you were to pull up the Iliad, for instance, it would all be in Greek, right? But each Greek word would be a hyperlink. And that hyperlink would take you to like dictionary definitions of each one of the words, and it would analyze like how it's declined or how it's conjugated. But also there would be you could also like take that paragraph and put it next to an English paragraph for a translation. So you have like all of these different ways of analyzing the language, even if you don't know Greek particularly. Like I took 4 years of Greek, but I couldn't possibly read it now without the help of some sort of tool. And Perseus Project is such an intuitive tool that I can use it, even though I haven't really done any work in Greek in decades.
I was happy I was able to remember like 3 words in Coptic Greek. So. Like,
right, yeah. So, but I can look. I mean, I can still look at a word and transliterate it so that I can pronounce it. But I wouldn't be able to like read a sentence. You know?
Hey, don't feel bad. I've taken 4 years of university level Japanese. Been here 13 years, and I still don't understand tatemae to the fullest. So it's all good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
I keep trying to. I've been working on Greek intermittently for a long time, and it doesn't stick if you're not doing it all the time. Okay, here I found something. I found something for you. Okay, there is no full equivalent, but Dartmouth has a really interesting thing called a Dante Lab Reader. Here, I'll put it in the chat. This is cool. You should pin this. So it lets you pull up the Italian on the left, and then you can pull up all of the freely accessible translations on the right to compare them. And you can side-by-side translations and commentaries. And there's a lot of commentaries on there.
That's
so
really good.
It's not hyperlinked. It does not. It doesn't look like. Hang on, let's see.
Okay.
It does not have hyperlinked to. Yeah, it doesn't have like the morphological tools that Perseus.
There's like it looks like there's like 30 commentaries on here, and they're not going to be the Sayers and the.
I wonder if it's just all the public domain ones. Like I wonder.
Oh, right. That makes sense. Yeah, right. Because I'm looking at the years here, and there's very few
there's
20th century.
There's ones from the 60s, so she should be in here anywhere. Like that. That's annoying.
They would have to have permission.
Because I bet the Hollander and Fosco ones are probably like were produced public domain. I bet they were.
If the Sayers estate still wants to sell books, then maybe they.
I mean, maybe,
if Penguin has the copyright.
They have Charles S. Singleton's on here, and that motherfucker was greedy as shit. Like, I can't imagine he gave up his rights to anything.
Yeah. I wonder. I might have to check the Robert Hollander one. I wonder if that was produced on like a National Endowment for the Humanities grant or something like that. You know, like something that required it to be public domain. But that it is cool that you can side by side these like this, and so you can choose which window you want commentaries in, which window you want different translations in. That's cool.
Yeah, that's
okay.
I'll try to figure out how to use that for the next one for like actual display. I don't want to fuck with.
Dang,
it.
most of the commentaries are in Italian, so that's helpful.
Well,
and here's another. Okay.
Well, but because it is in a browser, you can use Google Translate on it.
True.
So at the very least, you can get around trying to fucking transliterate for it.
So is this also like right here where it's like the first canto? That's written in like 13th century. Like that's the 13th century Italian that they're using.
Let me see. I bet they have an info on which text they're using because there are critical editions of the Italian as well. There's like manuscript.
Oh, there's only one English translation, so we have to go with Longfellow.
No, yeah. We have all of them.
You guys aren't wanting to read the German translation? Come on. Auf halbem Weg der Mensch. Come on, let's do it. We just start yelling.
I have not spoken German since I was about 7 years old when I finally gave up on it because my father was like obsessed with me learning one of the old languages, so I decided to learn Gaelic instead.
I'm pissed that my mom didn't teach me German. I'm so mad. Like, ugh. Dante Worlds, by the way, is one of the linked resources. That's super helpful as well. Each of their articles on like each of the steps through the poem gives like really cool historical background. It's pretty deep.
This
Dante Worlds is through.
Eucharist because I went old school, man. Pretty much straight Dewey Decimal System. I went and grabbed ISBN numbers and just started finding PDFs.
Hey, it's worth it. It's one of the shittiest websites you'll ever see. It's just like old school HTML. You know, you built this in high school kind of thing, but it has amazing commentary and resources.
Yeah, I'll have to check.
When like looking at this like from like a linguistic like anthropological point of view, I wonder exactly from where the region Dante was in, how different that Italian was from like a different region, like
very
nomenclature usage.
Very at that time.
I know.
I was about to say at this time, Tuscan Italian and Roma Italian were so different they needed translators in the Vatican.
Yep.
Yeah. I think I've been told, and I would want to ask a real scholar to confirm this. But there's in the history of German, for example, like one of the landmark coalescing of the German language is Luther's translation of the Bible. Everybody starts learning and reading that, and that becomes pretty not fully but pretty typical for what becomes High German or Hochdeutsch or whatever. And I think Dante has a kind of similar influence in some ways in Italian, but I want to get confirmation on that before I.
King James does the same in English.
Right on that. Yeah.
Well, certain things within King James which were adapted from. Don't get me started on that. We will be here all day, please.
Well, Shakespeare gets credit for which is that's quite a compliment to say that one playwright in London is making
I still think that's
is making more of a difference in people's like language changes in language than the Bible.
Well, see, but here's my thing. I think that, again, these are slight inaccuracies that we do because we finite it down. Rich, you know how I go on about Shakespeare. Shakespeare's a very valuable writer, but we have evolved since. People have taken his ideas and evolved them even further than what he was capable of, so on and so forth. And like to say it's only him, well, it's all the people that followed him too. So at the very least, we'd have to say like the Shakespearean school of language, which I would definitely attribute a whole school of language to due to the fact of.
Well, they call it Elizabethan language for a reason too. So it's not just like it was everybody that she sponsored who then goes on to sort of use the same form of the language because they're all living in the same part of London.
Well, yeah, but then there's variations pretty much as soon as the first generation. That's why I call it a school of language, because they all seem to follow the same rules that Shakespeare set out, but created their own subsystems after the fact.
But it says something that I can pick up a Shakespearean play, read it, and understand it. But then I can pick up a work that was 50 years prior, and I have no idea what it's saying.
Agreed.
Yep.
Like.
those random silent Fs that get you every time.
Okay, one more resource that's linked there that is amazing. The Princeton Dante project. The link on the website is broken, but it still exists in a different form. It has all of his minor works, and each of those has a side-by-side as well. So you pull it up, and it's got the Italian on the left, and at least one translation of the English on the right. So if you guys want to read De Monarchia, there's an English translation by Prue Shaw through the Princeton Project on there. And so you can, oh man, this is so cool. There's so many good
This is why I'm so
great,
glad we
one of
got
my
you,
favorites
Chris,
too.
is because I knew you were going to be as nerdy and excited about this shit as I was.
I feel like I should have known that this. I knew about the Dante Worlds. I've used that before, but I didn't know about the Princeton Dante project. And this is, oh my gosh, I love it. This is so cool.
Yeah, I'd love to do a De Monarchia one day because a lot of people know that I'm a big fan of secularism. Like, it's something I rave on about. And De Monarchia is like probably the earliest European work that really focuses on secularism that most people are familiar with.
First, within that era, we actually have like points of quote unquote secularism, not by that word because the word hadn't been invented yet, but like before that,
it's a Catholic word
going all the way back to the Greek city-states.
It used to be secular just meant that you weren't a priest.
And I'm not even arguing that. That's what I'm saying. The word hadn't been invented yet the concept of secularism as we know it today, the separation of church and state, that actually was proposed in a couple of Greek city-states. So it is something that was built upon again as time went on. And that's why it's like...
Yeah, I'm not even sure Dante used the word secular himself.
I don't know. I'd have to look. I don't
But
remember.
this actually plays into the comedy really well because of the time period between the the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, like the political rivalry they had, whether the Pope had more authority or the Holy Roman Emperor had more authority,
right?
Over
and the fact that the fact that the whole reason he puts the three previous popes in hell, including the current one, I guess the current and two previous popes in hell, is that he was himself, his family was being persecuted by the papacy. So I think that's why he became such a secularist, because he didn't want popes to have that kind of like earthly power.
Well, he was a white Guelph, and like the black Guelphs came in and basically kicked him out of the city.
Right.
Yeah, inter-party conflict is always where things get interesting.
Yes. Like getting into the politics of this day, I'm sure we will around Canto 42-ish, 43-ish, if I'm remembering correctly. We'll definitely get heavy into the politics, which will be probably one of the other few episodes we do, to those who are watching, that is probably only going to be one canto for an entire episode. So for those of you who are joining us, yes, you've been catching us bullshitting before we get started. This is going to be a digital apparatus of Dante's The Divine Comedy. We will be going through multiple translations, history, actually talking about like why certain translations are considered more accurate than others on certain levels, and etc. This will be for educational purposes, and hopefully you find it useful as we go on. So like, as we're getting started, like, I'd like to kind of go around, and I'll start with you, Chris, since he's the most excitable here. What are your feelings about, like, as we're going into Canto 1, like, all the research you've done going into it, like what is the emphasis you think that Dante was wanting to emphasize
here? I have come to a particular interpretation, I guess, or interpretational school of the Divine Comedy that we were mentioning beforehand, Mark Muse's translation that's really commonly used, and he, in his commentary, focuses a lot more heavily on the sort of like political and the social and what Dante is doing in terms of like throwing his enemies and popes and things into hell, which is, all good and useful and important stuff. But I have come to side more with, as we're going to talk about a lot, the sort of Dorothy Sayers approach to this, which is primarily this is a work of medieval literature. And so there are historical figures and historical characters that are used in it, but these are images with sort of layered meanings. And so there's, yes, Dante, the historical figure, but you also have Dante the pilgrim in the poem. You have these historical figures that were politicians in Italy, particularly in Florence at the time, but they are also used to make broader points about ultimately not even really the afterlife, but about each individual person's spiritual journey and what happens when you find yourself lost in a dark wood midway through it. So I think that's sort of the gist of the first part is, you find yourself middle of your life wandering from the correct path, and what do you do going forward? I think that's a very exciting place to start.
Okay. Thank you. Rich?
Well, one thing that we already agree from the start is that Dorothy Sayers is the GOAT when it comes to Dante studies. She's influenced me a lot. Like every time I go back to Dante, now it's been a long time since I've read Dante, so I've probably forgotten 80% of what I used to think, but I'm sure it'll all come back to me. But I also approach. I have an approach for poetry that I guess I picked up from a particularly good professor that I had back in the day, in that I like to look at meter a lot in poetry, and the ways in which anytime you have a departure from the normal meter, that is supposed to draw your eye. And to this day, when I see meter that doesn't do what it's supposed to do in a poem, and in terza rima, like the meter's like pretty darn regular. If you see something that's irregular, that's something that you like to pay attention to. So I like to look at the Italian for that reason, because that is something that won't go to translation unless the translator notices it and then emphasizes the word in some other way in translation. But that would be a difficult task, especially if you're already trying to recreate terza rima in English, which is what Dorothy does. But so there's that. And there's also her focus on imagery. So I tend to have a strong focus on imagery when I read Dante as well. What is it that we're supposed to viscerally get from what it is that we're reading? Because the images that are being presented to us, not just what the intellectual connections are, right, but what the sort of almost instinctual references are. And that can be difficult for someone like me because I tend to live in my head. And I don't think everything in this poem is speaking just to the mind. I think it's speaking to the heart as well. So those are the things I'm going to be looking at when I'm looking at the poem. I'm very interested in the historical aspects too, but that's not the first layer of meaning that jumps at me when I read this.
Gaspy?
Well, I don't think I have actually read this in 18 years, roughly. So
that's probably true for me too.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's my entire mindset, political thinking, and everything has changed since then. So it's going to be fun to go back through this and actually see this. But I'm more here for a cross-cultural analysis with this at the same time. I did theater, so I'm pretty well versed in Greek classics. So seeing the overlaps with Virgil's version of the underworld, and seeing the parallels between that and Dante's version of the underworld, as well as how this similarly ties into cross-cultural understanding with East Asia, and how the underworlds work between between different parts of the world. So I'm more have a better understanding of lore from East Asia, and there's a lot of parallels that I see here with characters and different figures that are present, and how they similarly apply to other cultures' thoughts of how the underworld works. And to me, that's very interesting.
It's funny you mentioned the Greek classics, because that would make you in some ways more knowledgeable than Dante himself, because as I'm sure Eucharist knows, the Odyssey was lost to us at the time that Dante wrote this. So he gets a lot of things wrong, especially when we get there, we'll get there, but especially the way he approaches the person he calls Ulysses, that we know better as Odysseus. He just makes up what happens to him because he doesn't know. He doesn't know Homer.
And for me, I come from this from a theological and emotive background, both as being raised Catholic, to be more specific, Irish Roman Catholic, and to where I am now, whereas I am a pagan who understands that all of our holy books are bullshit that people made up along the way trying to figure this shit out. Like any of the gods that are there, we don't know jack all about. We're just trying to find our way in the dark. So, like, when I look at this, I am going to be pulling from the emotive of, like, the cultural anthropological side, the actual history of the time period. So, like, when he puts these popes in hell, it wasn't just his enemies that, you know, that are there. It was also why they were his enemies, and where specifically he placed them in the hell, so that he could actually, you know, express as to why he held the beliefs he held. So this was as much social commentary as it was literary fan fiction. And that is important, especially in a time period where speaking out against the Pope was a death sentence. And this was probably quite literally the only way that he could do so and not end up at the mercy of the papacy. So, like, there is... I hope the audience who ends up watching this finds that we're trying to come at this from a cross-disciplinary and interdisciplinary approach so that we can give the fullest understanding of this text. Because we will get shit wrong. I mean, none of us can get this right because none of us speak 13th century Italian, and therefore we will make mistakes. It's just, it is what it is. But we are trying our best to give you things that will potentially help you on tests, potentially help you understand the book better when you hit hurdles, so on and so forth. So, to the audience in the future, I hope you enjoy. Now, as we get started, do we actually want to read the whole introduction? It's the introduction from Sayers. That's that's a lot of reading.
Probably not, but we could link it, maybe wherever this ends up. If it ends up, I'm guessing YouTube.
Yeah,
we could link it in the description. Or something.
We're live right now. Wonderful. I'm just not paying attention to chat because this is supposed to be a digital apparatus, not just a general stream.
Right.
So, so yeah, we don't need to watch the whole thing, and I can put the link in the description later to figure out how to get all this appropriately done without violating DMCA and all that stuff. But as we're going forward, I will say to the audience, please do read Sayers' introduction. It is lengthy. It's several pages, but she is a genius. Like, I know she's got a few things wrong based on my understanding of Latin, which does give some understanding of a little bit of the Italian, but the things that she gets wrong pale in comparison to all the things she gets right. So, like, please read her introduction. It's highly valuable. If you can find the most up-to-date copy of this, I've been told on Quora there is a revised version of the introduction that she put out just before the last publication, where it adds a few extra paragraphs and extra insights. So, for the audience, if you could find it, more power to you. I couldn't without paying several $100s.
I'm guessing the Penguin edition has the updated intro.
I don't know. Quora didn't give an exact ISBN for me to know. But to buy the, quote, most up-to-date copy off Amazon was like $280.
Jeez.
Yeah. Well, it's a big-ass book.
Not the Penguin, though. Is the Penguin abridged? Is that an issue at all?
Oh, I don't think it's abridged.
Think
That's what I'm saying.
so?
I think it's just an earlier edition without the little extension to the introduction. Because that was done after the fact. That was a later edition. It was never in the original book, and it was not written at the time the original book was. So, like, I've never even seen a copy of it. I have never seen a screenshot of it. I've just seen on Quora a bunch of people talking about it, and I looked for weeks and couldn't get it.
Yeah, I looked for that Penguin edition after you mentioned it, Eucharist, and I went to Amazon and it said that I already bought it in 2006. But
so you must have been familiar at some point.
Rather than go to my storage unit and go through all those boxes, I just ordered another copy. So now I'll have two.
There you go.
Now, you guys can't see this because I don't want to mess up our cameras at the bottom right of the screen, but right now I do have Sayers' first page up on Canto I, where it does have a minor portion of introduction to story as opposed to introduction to work. I think we should technically read this, so I will start with it because I think it kind of sets the mood for what we're about to read, and then we can kind of like round robin as we go, like reading going forward. The story. Dante finds that he has strayed from the right road and is lost in the dark wood. He tries to escape by climbing a beautiful mountain, but it is turned aside. First by gambly leopard, then by fierce lion, then finally by the ravenous she-wolf. As he is fleeing back into the wood, he is stopped by the shade of Virgil. Who tells him he cannot hope to pass the wolf and ascend the mountain by that road. One day a grey hound will come and drive the wolf back to hell, but only course at present left open to Dante is to trust himself to Virgil, who will guide him by a longer way, leading him through hell and purgatory, and from there to the worthier spirit. From there, a worthier spirit. Then Virgil will lead him on to see the blessed souls in paradise. Dante accepts Virgil as his master, leader, and lord, and they set out together. Like the way that she puts this. This is one of the points that I think she gets wrong. Because in the Latin, it is not leader. It is essentially, there is no one-to-one equivalent. It's essentially like pathfinder or trailblazer. So it is a leader, but not a leader as in authority. It is a leader as in guide. And I think that should have been like pointed out here as opposed to like emphasizing it as like 3 points of authority. It is one of the few points that I disagree with her early on with, by the way, because she's pulling from a later canto where that word, like I said, it means more like a guide than an authority, just because he's been there before. So like as we're going into this, she's pointing out that this is getting the story to a entirety of the path, that Dante, or at least in this situation, the character had the perception of this will have an end goal, as opposed to this is just a journey of like self-discovery, as many later critics and scholars will point out that Dante, this was a work of internal self-discovery. No, that's part of it, but that's not all of it. So like this points this out, that he always had the intention to really get from beginning to end and express all of his beliefs and all of his understandings of these things. And in this time period, to set out about to use the appropriate term, a magnum opus of this magnitude, was beyond rare. People think of it being rare today. That's with 8 billion people on the planet. Imagine how rare by proximity this would, or by scale this would be when the entire population of the world is less than 900 million. So like, who wants to start the reading? Because I keep coughing and I'm having allergies.
Where are we reading? Like,
right now I was reading Sayer's brief story introduction. We can do whichever one of the ones you want to do. We're starting on Canto I now, like the first line of the first page of that. I just read Sayer's little introduction there because it's short and it was poignant.
No, I'm just wondering, are we using what Eucharist linked us, or
oh no,
which
link are we using? I have. I'll put them up in the group chat again.
Yeah, the one that iCal linked, the PDF of the Sayers translation, is what he has up on screen.
Yes.
But what I linked, you could read from the Longfellow if you wanted, I assume.
Okay.
Yeah, I have. Hold on, I'll put both of them in here again. Wait a minute. Oh, wait, that one's too big. I forgot. I forgot the one of them. The copy of Sayers that I have up on screen is 2 gigabytes. Because I wanted to have like the cleanest excuse me, I wanted to have the cleanest scans for display to the stream. And I just tried putting it in Discord, and it's like, you have to subscribe, and I'm like, I am subscribed, and they're like, you have to go all the way up to the highest tier of Nitro. Nope. So like I said, whichever one we want to start on, we can go back and forth, compare and contrast, because this is also an important thing. At the time when Longfellow wrote his translation, it was quite literally considered the pinnacle of the works. And it was held as the pinnacle of the works for almost a century after the fact. So, like, either one is a valuable insight into this. Now, Rich doesn't like Longfellow's translation because he likes to do rhyming couplets. Thankfully, he didn't do that here. he stuck to the tercet method of Dante. Rich, would you like to start reading? Since actually you are the one who inspired all this so many months ago. And you're muted, by the way, bud. You're muted, Rich.
Sorry, I didn't have the Longfellow up, but I do now.
You can do either one. I have both up so that we can go back and forth.
No, I was thinking probably Longfellow would be good just because it's going to be a little more, because he doesn't like force it into the tertiary, or actually kind of does a little bit. But I don't know, since that's what everyone has.
I mean, we all have access to both. That's what I'm saying. You can do whichever one you want.
Okay, so I'll read it first, and then I don't know how far in I should read, but
let's go. Want to do 3 at
like
a time,
how many
guys?
stanzas at a time?
You want to do 3 or 4 at a time, guys?
No.
It's up to you.
I think probably we should end where we think, like,
okay, yeah,
whatever makes sense as we're reading it. Right?
Yeah, we won't set a set point. We'll pick a point like when it's like, okay, we got to talk about this now. Okay, yeah, that works out too. All right, go ahead.
Although I'm not seeing an obvious way to move to the next 3 stanzas.
Well, that's what I said. We won't set a arbitrary stanza.
Oh, I see. It scrolls. Yeah. Okay, no, I just didn't understand that. Okay. Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark. I suppose that was for meter's sake. For the straightforward pathway had been lost. Ah me, how hard a thing it is to say, with this forest savage, rough and stern, which in the thought renews the fear. So bitter is it, death is little more. But of the good to treat, which there I found, speak will I of the other things I saw there.
Yeah, see, and I know what you mean, because there is a word in there, or 2 words that are removed from that one line, the rude, which, like, it's actually something I wanted to ask Euchris about, because he is highly educated on these subjects. How do you, because this is actually a translation from Ecclesiastical Latin, the rude wood, I don't understand how a inanimate wood would be rude in this ancient connotation of the word.
Let me see.
It's on Sayre's line, but not in Longfellow's.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that she's using rude in the sort of archaic sense that we might say like crude, like a rude piece of furniture would be something that's like not polished, basically. I think that's how she's using it. So where he says, savage, rough and stern, that's sort of like rough and ready, like it's like there's nothing about this. It feels like a cultivated orchard, right? It's like this kind of sort of old growth, overwhelming thing.
We have a wayward member of this troop join us. If you want to back in, I could add you to the group chat for next week, Ty.
I knew you guys were going to do this eventually. I was kind of like, oh, wow, we got Eucharist and you awesome people together? I'm like, holy shit.
Well, we're getting started.
How's everyone doing?
We're doing good. We're getting started on the reading. Let me add you to the group chat so you have the links. So you can get back to where we are.
I can't promise anything. Is this going to be a Saturday thing now?
As often as we can.
Okay. Saturdays are really hit and miss with me. I'll definitely jump in on some of the ones that I can.
Like Eucharist isn't going to be here. I mean, we're going to be doing this for 34 weeks, man. Like Eucharist isn't going to be able to make all of them. Beckett isn't going to make all of them, and Fairy Queen isn't going to make all of them. Those 2 didn't, obviously didn't make today. But we weren't even sure you were going to make it because you had stepped out before. But I'm glad you're here. For those who are in the chat watching this, this is Tiberius D. He is a geopolitical wonk who will be bringing more of a modern approach to this, and I would say more centrist political ideology approach to the analysis of these works. Okay, so the link I just posted, the most recent, is the Longfellow translation, which is the one we're currently reading out of. Let me pin. Okay, the one I just pinned is the Sayers one, which we are going back and forth between during the readings. So it's essentially talking about crude. So this would be a untended wood, is what you were getting at, Eucharist.
Yeah, and I was just looking at the word. One of the other really useful tools for those of us who are not super linguists, one of the greatest free tools in the world is Wiktionary. It's like Wikipedia, but it's for words and histories of words and roots of words and meanings of words.
Go into the sources.
Yes.
Don't just trust the page.
Yeah, especially for ancient languages, it's not always as good. But for example, the word that I think is the one that Sayers is choosing to render rude there. She has this lineage from Old Occitan, Vulgar Latin into Italian, and in Italian it means savage or ferocious or brutal even, but of a people or a nation it's savage or primitive. So that's, rude or uncultivated, I think is sort of what she was getting at there.
Really, I'm not sure that that's all that archaic, right? Because you are kind of being a savage when you're being rude, right?
No. I mean, it's just not
archaic.
I think exactly the same sense that we use, right?
Yeah,
if I say, "Oh, that's rude," yeah, I tell my daughter when she talks back to me, "That's rude." I think it's slightly different, but you're right. It's it is savage, primitive, or uncultivated.
No, but it is the archaic version, because now we have delineated that into two different words of crude and rude. One delineating the quality, one delineating the mode of acting. That is something that they would have delineated with an inflection or a particular phonemic vowel to accent and change these things. I guess we lost Ty. That or he's getting on his computer. He was on his phone when he jumped in at first.
Mm-hmm.
Now that being said,
but I was just thinking of some of the ways in which we use. Okay, so if you in Wiktionary, it says that the Latin rudus means rough, raw, rude, wild, or untilled. So I'm just thinking, if your kids are being rude, often you'll describe them as being wild, right? You said they're wild today, or or if you might say that somebody's a little bit rough. He was a little bit rough with her in terms of the way that he handled her, which is rudeness.
But this is this is a singular point translation, whereas I'm looking at it in the context. When you're using it to talk about an inanimate, non-moving object, moving but very slow.
Unless it's an int.
We apply it to persons now.
Where I would say this almost sounds like she's trying to, but did not have the acute, or Dante did not have the acute word for it, of Paleolithic, almost like an ancient wood in a way that is more ancient than ancient. She was trying to delineate where it's not only ancient but it's wild.
Which I think the Longfellow savage is probably would be the preferred translation of that word, but I think she was going for a one syllable word because she's preserving the terzarima and the meter. So instead of savage, she chooses rude. Okay.
What was that, Despy?
Well, what I was going to say is when you're talking about it in that context, would that mean so a lot of times, especially when it comes to wood cutting and stuff in that time period there, they would cut in a way to make areas traversable. Would it mean that then that the wood that he's talking about there, the forest region that he's talking about there, is very impassable? And that's the reason why it is rude in that sense.
Yeah, and that would almost delineate also the danger, which then brings in the other connotations that they bring in with the other descriptive words. because this seems like an untamed wood. That's why I brought up, like, I asked about it, because to me this was like, especially when you're talking about Dante, he is used to what we now call agroforestry, where he is used to people cultivating orchards, doing forestry to create walkable trails for travelers, so on and so forth. And this is a wood that's as untouched by man, and it is kind of how I read it. Because I got stuck by that, because I went back and forth on that translation between Sayers and Longfellow 3 times, and I'm like, there's a reason why Longfellow pulled this out. And I think because when Longfellow wrote the word, we also did not have this, like, connotation for untouched. Jeremy, we're live at the
If you look at the Italian, it's Selvaggia Aspra e Forte. And if it's in the, if it's
Savage, wild, and strong,
yeah, I would say probably rude relates to forte in that regard. So she's changing the order around a bit, which also, I mean, forte means strong, literally. But I don't know what aspra means. I'll have to look that up.
Aspra's harsh, and so she has rude, rough, and stubborn. And I feel like she's keeping the same order and just choosing looser wording for it. But
okay, so Selvaggia, which would mean savage,
right,
is
so
rude.
So Longfellow has savage. I think she's using rude instead, and then harsh she chooses rough, I think, and strong she uses stubborn.
She's doing
which,
it
again,
for the meter,
like, relating to forestry. Yeah, but
she
like
probably needs to cut down
stubborn
on the
wood
syllables.
to cut.
Yeah.
Is a strong wood, right? Like when we made a table recently, and it's out of hardwood. Our dinky little Harbor Freight planer was not good for a stubborn piece of wood. Right? It's not good. Okay, we're getting very hung up on the wood here.
Well,
yeah.
Well, no, but the reason I was getting at this is because this is she's trying to delineate or he's trying to delineate the actual level of severity of what he's going into, and I think that is actually important to show, because they're trying to show that he's not only off the road, he's off the road and very deeply away from where humanity is known to rulers, and that is something that to a vast majority of humans, being isolated as a communal species, we are definitely going to find terrifying. It's almost like a mouse being out in the open without any cover. Yeah.
So if you're going for the cognate, it's going to be savage.
Yeah.
All right, so I will try to go next with my shitty fucking lungs at the moment. I cannot well repeat.
Before you do, I just want. Are we analyzing after each reading, or are we just
as needed?
Reading
as needed.
Okay.
Yeah, because that one.
So
was like,
I just wanted to say
but...
that of the elements that are brought up, that in the what you read from Sayers, that she describes the right road, the dark wood, the beautiful mountain, the gambling leopard, the fierce lion, and the ravenous she-wolf. So far, in what I read, the right road and the dark wood are in there. So we can talk about that now, or do you want to wait until we get to
we can go into that now.
Okay. Right. So then the question is, because I think a lot of this is going to be foreshadowing what's going to happen later. We'll talk about that with the beautiful mountain, which is in what you're going to read. But he's walking down the right road. He's walking down a road. I lived in Italy for a year, so there are a lot of areas where there's a pathway, but it's in the middle of these like really thick woods. And as long as you stay on the path, you won't get lost. And but of course, he wanders off of the right road and winds up in the dark wood, and that's all described in those first 3 stanzas. Anything to say about that?
I mean,
I'll just read real quickly the Sayers interpretation of the images, because this is, like I said, right. I think is the thing that Sayers is very good at. Like, she understands images in medieval literature quite well, and the sort of different layers each of them can have. If you go back and read the introduction, she kind of explains the way medieval allegory kind of works, but like that the medieval writers quite intended for there to be multi-levels of interpretation. The quote-unquote literal, just what is the story saying? The allegorical, what does it symbolize? The images themselves, the sort of the spiritual, the personal, all these things were available interpretations to a medieval reader. So when we get into these arguments about like biblical interpretation, for instance, it's only relatively recently in Christian history that the idea of just a literal translation out of a text was, the only or even the primary reading that you might draw from it. I'll send you guys a lecture later on this.
This is literally we don't talk as often as I would like you, Chris, but quite literally, I'm getting you have my novel in your DM. I am potentially putting the second novel off to write an anti-apologetics book, because like I love intellectually honest religious people, because it allows for like actual nuanced discussion that can gain meaning. Dealing with fundamentalist literalists is, to put it kindly, mind-numbing.
Well, to be clear, there is a literal interpretation, and I do like the literal interpretation, but it's one of several interpretations that are all important.
But that wasn't even the primary until the 1800s. Yeah. And that's what and that's what I'm getting at. Is like we had 1800
whole dispensationalist
years.
Tradition is
we had 1800 years without.
Not to mention higher criticism.
Mm-hmm.
Before
we get off too far,
go to the Sayers thing.
Yeah, so she's, for the image that we've got so far, the dark wood, she says, and again, this is her interpretation, so I'm sure it's contestable, but she says, the dark wood is the image of sin or error, not so much of any specific act of sin or intellectual perversion, as of that spiritual condition called hardness of heart, in which sinfulness has so taken possession of the soul as to render it incapable of turning to God or even knowing which way to turn. And I think she's really drawing it there. Well, actually, I'll let you read your next part, because I think the next three really kind of hit on where she's getting this idea that it's hardness of heart, not any specific sin. Yeah.
And I will slightly touch upon that, because she is touching upon that. When you look at the way Longfellow writes it, he actually is trying to pull more to the humanist element as opposed to the religious element, even though he himself was religious. He was trying to actually show that regardless of religion, this story holds the same meaning. It's not a matter of hardness of heart. Anybody can fall off the right path very, very easily through a couple of very quick bad decisions. And I think that's an important thing to delineate, is that it's both. And I think Sayers trying to, to push more of her own beliefs in there as well, forwent that part of the analysis, just because she considers that a universal extension of what she is saying, whereas it's not to anybody who's a non-believer. But okay, now back to the reading. I cannot repeat how there I entered, so full was I of slumber at that moment, in which I had abandoned the true way. But after I had reached the mountain's foot, at that point where the valley terminated, which had consternation pierced my heart, upward I looked, and I beheld its shoulders, vested already that planet's rays, which leadeth others right by every road. And this is where I think you're right, she is drawing more of the heart and of the heart, the actual, because it's drawing certain biblical imagery of, like, the flat world, certain height you can see all, and so on and so forth. My issue with that is again, Dante was, a believer, he was also very much a humanist in all of his writings, and I think he, like Longfellow, was trying to point to both, which is why he accentuates the planet's rays, so it is natural, but then he also points, which leadeth others right by every road. So he's pointing to both the humanist and the theological within that final tercet.
Yeah. There's I like that, that first, like, lines 10, 11, and 12, where he says, I can't repeat how there I entered, so full was I of slumber at the moment in which I abandoned the true way. It's almost like he's saying, there probably was a time when I did abandon the true way. There probably was a moment, if I could find it, but I was full of slumber. Like, I was sort of sleepwalking through life, there's that great College Humor skit of Tim Burton, pitching his next movie. They're all sleepwalking through life. Oh, great. Again, but that's sort of how it's described, right? It's just like I was slumbering in the moment when I left the right path. But then he gets to the foot of this mountain, which we could talk about too, because Sayers has a whole paragraph on that. But above the mountain, he sees that planet's rays, and it's important, like you mentioned, the medieval cosmology here. That planet he's describing is the sun. They've described as a planet, but it's in terms of the image in the story, it's the sun. In terms of what the image represents in the allegorical sense, it's the light of God, and that's why he says it leads others right by every road. And yes, you're right. He has these humanist tendencies where he would affirm, along with many other medieval humanists, that to the extent that any pagan does right, it's sort of informed by, I think, this sort of divine light that is everywhere in humanity, the image of God, and all of this.
Yes, a slight insult to it.
But yeah, that this planet's rays are
the only way,
God's
and
guidance. Yeah.
we just came up with a bad translation. Yeah, I'm aware of that insult.
Yeah.
Started by Augustine, by the way.
Well, there are other
Right.
lights. There are other lights in the sky, right? But
Yes.
if God is the sun, then it's a light that is like immeasurably more powerful than those other lights.
It's also this comes from the observable universe as well. The sun is the only light in the sky that will produce rays within our atmosphere. So this is again why it was attributed more significance, much like the moon, because the moon can generate rays, but only within certain conditions, whereas the sun can do it at any moment. So these are given. That's why when you go back to the creation story, which sorry people who aren't religious watching this, but this is the whole point of creating the two great lights in the sky, one to rule the day, one to rule the night. This is what it is talking about, is that great light was a planet in and of itself, because the Bible is talked about as being smaller than the earth, and suspended within the firmament. Dante at this point would know better, because we would have had Brahe and several other astronomers at this point, but he still points this out because it's obvious to everybody, and every culture has drawn some significance to worship of the sun at some point in their history.
This is something I actually did write a paper on in college, and Dante didn't know better. There might have been people who had those ideas and published them, of course, like you mentioned, but his source was a Muslim astronomer. You probably know his name.
I don't remember the guy's name, but yeah.
I think I don't want to even say Aravoas or something.
I'd have to look up the actual word.
He was a Muslim astronomer who was sort of like known in Italy and was considered to be the authority on astronomy of the day. And so he didn't really know better. And also, I just wanted to make clear, the reason why the sun is called a planet is because a planet means wanderer, and the sun and the wandering is relative to the field of stars in the sky. Mm-hmm. So anything that doesn't move in alignment with the stars as the Earth is turning, of course they didn't think of it that way, but we know as the Earth is turning, that's why all of the stars sort of move in the same direction. There are some things in the sky that don't move in that same direction, and those are the planets. So the sun and the moon, as well as everything that we call a planet today, all move in ways that are different from all the other stars in the sky.
Let me rephrase that. He knew better that it wasn't a firmament. And that's what I was.
No.
I didn't elaborate as far as I should have, I guess. But because, like, at this point in time, we understood certain things were allegory as opposed to literal, like, very widely.
I'm not totally convinced of that. So you mentioned Brahe, and Brahe is later, a couple hundred years later, because he's 15. He's born in 15.
No, you're right. I didn't misspeak. I was meaning the Galileo and the others previously.
Yeah. So I posted a thing in the chat, the sort of like medieval cosmology, and as far as I can tell, I mean, unless Dante is just really ahead of his time, I think he just fully buys into this. This is something. So C.S. Lewis and his discarded image talks about
geocentrism, but he didn't believe in the firmament. Is all I was getting at, and that's why I said I didn't delineate far enough.
Yeah,
and that was my fault, because we had primitive
maybe
telescopes.
We'll get clearer on this though when we get to Paradise, if we ever get there, because that's a long way away. But the movement through Paradise, guided by Beatrice, is movement through these medieval heavens. And so I mean, obviously, you're like we'd need to distinguish between what's in the story versus what Dante thinks is real. Like, Sayers is very careful to say Dante doesn't think hell is like this. Like, this is not supposed to be, this is hell in the poem, not the actual hell, that sort of thing. But when you get into the heavens, it's less clear to me that he isn't convinced that this is sort of the way the cosmos is laid out. But I mean, we can hash all this.
No, because this is an interesting point, because this is going to be an ongoing narrative going forward. Why do you think he has that delineation point for hell but not heaven? And that same delineation point for purgatory and hell but not heaven?
Yeah, no, I would say it is there for heaven in the sense that the heaven that he describes is very clearly not the actual heaven. Like, as he meets the saints in heaven, like when you get to heaven in the story, which I'm so excited for us to do that, you meet people who are at a further proximity from God and a closer proximity to God. But several times characters in this narrative will tell Dante, by the way, this is just your imagination. In heaven, everything is perfect and all is culminated. This is just a way for you to understand the sort of ascent of the soul. But really, we are all in equal communion, equally close to God. It's this sort of cosmological mystery. So that things are not laid out like this, like these people are further away from God in heaven. You realize that's not the way it actually is, right? Characters in the poem will tell Dante that. But they are moving through a heaven that I think, as far like in terms of the real world heavens, used as a picture of what heaven could be like. I think that's the way that
I understand what you're saying, but here's the thing. As we've pointed out, he was one of the medieval humanists while being a believer. And to this, I don't believe he believed... I believe this was essentially his espousing the same belief that I do. We don't know shit about what happens after, before, none of that. Because it is something that, according to the scriptures, is outside time, outside of our understanding. This is something that, quite literally, by the way that we perceive the world and evidence, we could not perceive until we get to that plane of existence. So every perception is wrong, and I think that's what he's trying to portray through this entire story, which is why this story was considered heresy in so many parts of Europe.
No, I buy that. I just think like it's really different. This is one reason I do love the Discarded Image. It's a great series of lectures because it is, as you mentioned before we got started, in sense like it is so hard for us to even begin to understand what it would be like to understand the medieval mind, right? Distinguishing between actually understanding and then the closest approximation we can get. It's so hard to even get there. But we're one thing that Lewis emphasizes is like, yes, these things are beautiful and they make good stories, but up to a point, these people did actually believe these things were true. The sort of perfect concentric circles of the cosmos, and how they were laid out.
Yeah, but some did. But I think
because like it's not actually even Kepler, right?
And by the way, that was Averroes that Dante's source, which was a 12th century astronomer.
Yeah,
like Kepler is one of the first people in this sort of tradition to be willing to say on the basis of his observations, no, these things aren't perfect circles. They're perfect ellipses, and they're still laid. The cycles of the heavens are still laid out in these concentric ellipses that are perfect because God is perfect. Like even the people who start sort of pressing the bounds of this a few hundred years after Dante are still struggling with the idea of the fixity and the uniformity and
we don't have perfect humanism now. I'm not saying he was a perfect humanist, but I think he's trying to point this out, which is why so many bishops and cardinals considered his writings heretical. Like, come on, if they saw it as that, how can we not also at least entertain that interpretation?
Well, I'll entertain the interpretation that it was perceived as heretical, at least partially because he's putting popes in hell. That's a rough thing. But in terms of like what he actually lays out in the cosmology, it seems perfectly in line with what's being taught, right?
Well, but he goes
this
back
is what the
and
church
forth.
teaches.
I'm just saying that's what he's going back and forth, and he's showing that as we learn more, because that's something throughout his works. The learning of man is one of the betterments of man. He also points to the dangers, but. Yeah, I know you were about to correct me, Rich. He points to... Go ahead.
I was going to say something else, but...
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, I'm not... I mean, humanism is very present in Catholic history. Yep. Some of the earliest humanists were Catholic humanists. Bernard de Clairvaux comes to mind, who's one of my favorites. And Bernard of Clairvaux is prior to Dante, so like there's... that tradition is there, but I don't necessarily think that that Dante being considered heretical is necessary. Like, there's a lot of forms of heresy besides humanism, right?
Well, no,
and in fact, humanism is not heresy.
He himself, but some of the humanist principles that he talks about here that we don't know, that this is wrong, that this is all your imagination, that is him talking to the reader, not himself, and therefore that is him pointing to these things you believe you know with absolute certainty. Much of that is your imagination or the imaginations of other men. That does not mean God is not real. That just means that you have to think. You have to understand. You have to actually interpret and believe to yourself. Because like other people can be wrong. You can be wrong. And that is something that Dante points out throughout all of his works. So again, if they keep pointing out that this is a point of his heresy, that he keeps pointing to the failings of man, even at the highest orders of beatification within man, that is the heresy, because there is no quote unquote divine perfect knowledge to have, as was believed in that time. Do you disagree, Eucharist?
I'm hunting my sources. I will. This is the quote I was looking for, and insofar as this is true, I'll agree with you, and then we can hash out, I think, the particulars of Dante's agreement with medieval cosmology later. This is from the introduction. I hang on, she may have died before this one came out, so I'm making sure this is Sayers. I think it's Sayers who wrote the introduction. I think someone else did the translation, but she still did the commentary. No, this is Barbara Reynolds' introduction, because Sayers died before this one came out. This is page 27 of the Penguin. Sayers' translation, Barbara Reynolds' commentary. I had it backwards, of the Paradiso. Barbara Reynolds says that Dante's thought was, while closely associated with the cosmology of his period, was in no way dependent on it. Philosophy in his day was the dominant branch of learning. What we now call science tended to conform its findings to the requirements of philosophy. This had long been the case, but she kind of goes on and says, like, basically, like, he's able to distinguish, as you're saying, between poetic and factual statement. He's able to do that in his biblical interpretation. He's able to do that in the poem. And so, yeah, I won't dogmatize Dante as being, well, maybe from your perspective, so dumb as to actually believe this is the way the heavens are constructed. I'm just not convinced he doesn't also actually believe
No, here's the thing. When I say humanist, he's also a believer. That means he has these doubts. Yeah. Doubts do not equal complete disbelief. And that I'm just trying to point out that this is what he was writing and trying to get to the readers, because as a humanist, he was trying to spread knowledge and comfort to those people. Like, that is... Oh, go ahead, Despy.
Yeah, Well, there was one thing I wanted to say on this, and it was basically that when this was being read out loud and read to me, I quite literally just remembered reading like the text after text after text of Chinese, folklore and Japanese folklore, in which this is literally how almost all of it always starts, is that I was walking along a road, I kind of disassociated, and all of a sudden I'm fucking lost.
Well, and I think this is kind of the point of most of this mythology. It is quite literally to point out that even with all of the best intentions, it is our consciousness of our actions that actually will dictate the outcomes of them. Doing unconscious action leads to unconscious outcomes. And I mean, that's a more modern interpretation, but I believe that's what this is trying to show through these mythologies and folklores. Because consciousness, as we understand it today, is not unique to humans, but it is something that we are the primary users of it on a intentional level. And that is why we are able to do the quote-unquote great and terrible things that we do. So, and going to what you said, that's all I'm getting at. I'm not saying he's saying it's perfect. I'm not even saying he thought these other planets had, like, mass and stuff. Like I don't think he knew that. I just think he understood that, hey, we have primitive telescopes, and we can see something's different about this. And it's not in a big-ass glass dome. You know, like, I think he was able to figure that much out. And because at the time he wrote this, most of the educated knew this. Not all, but most of the educated. They may still have had their beliefs of the heavens and hells, but they still believed that there was outside of this world, beyond the firmament, not just a great chaotic watery deep.
I will say I do think, and we can parse this out later. I think in Dante's time it would have been the norm to believe and this is how it is depicted in most of medieval iconography that does depict the spheres of the heavens. It would have been normal to believe that the Earth was a sphere like all of the other spheres. It was just surrounded by these concentric bigger circles of heaven. So first you pass through the heaven of air, and then the heaven of fire, and then you're in the heaven that the moon occupies. So there's this perfect sphere around the Earth that the moon orbits within, and then beyond that the sun.
I mean,
and
yeah, incorrect, but pretty goddamn advanced for their time period.
Yeah. So to some degree, this is a spoiler, but since we're talking about this, like he will later on in Paradiso describe the heavens as a series of spheres that are made out of a crystalline structure, that are transparent crystalline structures, so that the lights of the heavens like shine through all of these domes because they're transparent.
Well, and this comes from going back to his knowledge from Muslim astronomers and scientists. He also had the understanding.
It's avarice, by the way.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, that's why I said thank you. I just hadn't got to read it yet because we were still talking about all the other stuff.
Right.
But like they had a concept not of a true prism, but they did have a concept of refracted light, and this was the only way man could create rays artificially. So they believed that this crystalline structure was also how it was the rays were being created above their head, at least according to ancient science beliefs. Just to bring in the science aspect of it, since I'm a nerd.
Right, and to be clear, Avarice wrote about 200 years before this was written. So he's, science doesn't update all that fast in the Middle Ages. So the fact that it was from 200 years prior doesn't mean it wasn't considered cutting-edge science for his day.
Well, but the thing is a lot of people, especially in modern Western world, they forget how much of our science we got from the Islamic world, especially in this time period.
Right.
And like
that's something that'll come up. That'll be important in the Purgatorio,
yep.
Because in Purgatorio, like that's where you get that misunderstanding of Ulysses. That he, according to Dante, he sails out through the pillars of Hercules, and winds up discovering purgatory on the other side of the world. So, which of course we know that's not what happens, because we've all read Homer, but he hadn't. So he's free to make up whatever he wants.
I think since these next three have to do with piety, we'll have good old Eucharist read it.
All right. Let's see. So we've just gotten to
our commentary on it thus far too. So
so we've just gotten to he sees the foot of the mountain and the planet's rays, which leads everybody by the right road. Then was the fear a little quieted that in my heart's lake had endured throughout the night, which I had passed so piteously. And even as he who with distressful breath forth issued from the sea upon the shore turns to the water perilous and gazes, so did my soul that was still fleeing onward turn itself back to re-behold the pass which never yet a living person left. Let me do the... Yeah, no, that's it. That's as far... the next part starts than you thought. I love this. I prefer the way that Sayers does this because it's clearer, but I like Longfellow's poetry more there. But Sayers translates this, and as a swimmer, panting from the main, heaves safe to shore, then turns to face the drive of perilous seas and looks again. Like, you've just made it out of, like, you almost drowned, you've made it to shore, and you look back and look back and look back again. Basically, you're just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I made it through that. He's like, I've made it past this thing and kind of look back. So while my soul yet fled, did I contrive to turn and gaze on that dread pass once more, whence no man yet came ever out alive. So I don't know. I like the way she translates it more because it's clearer to me. But
well, no, I understand what you mean, and like going to Longfellow's commentary on this one, he actually brings up that this is a reference to Jeremiah 2. that led us through the wilderness, through the land of the deserts and the pits, through the land of drought and the shadow of death, through the land that no man had passed through and where no man had dwelt. In his note upon this passage, Mr. Wright quotes Spenser's lines: "The fairy queen, the creature never passes that back return without heavenly grace." Again, bringing into the point that this is more of like, I just overcame something and now I'm gazing back, and that is a little bit more clear.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
But now we're at the foot of the mountain. He makes it there, and he tries to climb it, and so I don't know who wants to read next. But
yeah, well, Despy would be next on this one.
After my weary body I had rested, the way resumed I on the desert slope, so that the firm foot ever was the lower, and lo, almost where the ascent began, a panther, light and swift exceedingly, which with a spotted skin was covered o'er, and never moved she from before my face, nay, rather did impede so much my way, that many times I too return had turned. The time was the beginning of the morning, and up the sun was mounting with those stars, that with him were, what time the love divine.
Yeah, we went one further, but I'm glad you did, because if we had stopped where you just got turned away, that would have been weird.
But can we read the next one too? Because there's an incomplete line there. So when what time the love divine, going into line 40 is another. It's a continuation of the same sentence.
Okay. At first in motion set those beauteous things, so were to me occasions of good hope. What is it?
Variegated.
What is that? Variegated skin of that wild beast.
Yeah. So he gets to that. The end. So he's trying to ascend the mountain. He gets stopped by the panther or the leopard, and then he's made it through night, and it's morning, and so the sun is mounting. It says, with those stars that with him were, what time the love divine at first in motion set those beauteous things. And the way Sayers translates that is, the sun climbed with the stars whose glitterings attended on him when the love divine first moved those happy prime created things. Again, there's the medieval imagery of Venus, the star of the morning, attending the sun as he's moving into the sky, as these angels did in the creation narrative, effectively, is sort of what's being brought out. And so we get this line, which is wonderful foreshadowing, because the very last line, spoilers, of the Paradiso describes that love that moved the sun and other stars, the sort of prime mover, first mover, the love that draws all things together in this sort of harmonious, spherical, blah, blah, blah. You get this image of love divine in the sun that's attendant with these spiritual beings, like when all these things were first made new. It's like this new morning, he breathes a sigh of relief. It's like, uncreation has been made new again.
There's
the line afterwards.
But then as you go back to Longfellow's commentary, he points out that the portion of the panther light and swift exceedingly is quite literally about the political Florentine politics, about pleasure and Bianchi and Neri. Mm-hmm. Then when he gets to that many times I to return had turned, is pointing to a particular play on words with an Italian which translates horribly. Pio volte volto. It's pointing to not only a revolution of this turning, but the repeated attempts within this revolution. And then furthermore, when it goes into talking about the stars that it talks about in end upon the sun and mounting with those stars, it's talking about a very specific set of stars. It's talking about the stars of Arius. Because at this particular time when Dante was writing, they believed the world was created in spring, and therefore the stars of Arius would be the dominant ones at this particular point, which again brings you to your point that it was about creation, but it was also, again, a social commentary about worldly pleasures.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned, Chris, you mentioned I looked back. I just kind of did a little search in the canto. Because he looks back also when he gets to the foot of the mountain. And in fact, he talks about turning back or looking back or going back 5 different times in this canto.
Mm.
And I know that later on he will be reticent to move forward as he's being led deeper into hell. He's like constantly looking to go back where he came from rather than moving forward. But it seems to me that there's 2 ways that you could look at this, because he's now in the dark woods, right? So maybe he's looking back because he wants to find that right path again, which would be a good instinct, right? He wants to be back on the right path. He doesn't want to be lost. Or you could see this as the first of continuing mistakes, where instead of going in the direction that he needs to go, which is to go through this entire journey that's ahead of him, he already wants to turn around and flee in the other direction. And that would be a mistake. So or maybe we're intended to consider both of those possibilities.
Well, I would say that it is the humanist aspect again from Dante. He is talking about both. He is talking about both, because the doubts, the fears of going forward. Is this the right path that I am getting back onto now that I am in the dark wood? All of this comes into play again. Now this one I'll have to pull a little bit more biblically from, but it's coming from the talk. The period where many liars and fools will try to mislead you, and it's quite literally trying to express that you can't know if this is the right path going forward. You must consider each step, at least in my interpretation of that.
Yeah.
You're muted, by the way, Rich.
It's okay. Go ahead.
The Sayer's note on that line, "Whence no man yet ever came out alive," she interprets that as like, there's a kind of relief in looking back, but she says Dante, as we shall see, is by no means out as yet, nor will he be until he has passed through the death unto sin. And so the way she's interpreting that is like, okay, he's found himself in the dark wood, right? He dissociates. I love that as Desperado said, and ends up on the wrong path in the dark wood, and now he's made it through this terrible trial, and he's at the foot of the mountain that he thinks is his salvation. He's going to climb up it, and he'll be fine. He's looking back and like, whoo, good thing I made it through that. But the point, as she's interpreting it, is no man has ever made it out alive through this, because in order, once you've lost that path, to come back to it, you have to die to sin, and the process of dying to sin on the level of the soul is the process that he's going to go through as he examines human sin in the journey through hell.
Well, that's what I'm saying, but it is both, because this is meant to be read on multiple levels, and that's why, while I like Sayers, she puts a little bit too much of her own belief into it, where she cuts off at one interpretation, when, as we know, there should be multiple.
Sayers often gives multiple interpretations. Although I don't necessarily think that she considers them contradictory.
Right.
But if you'll notice, the times when she does singular is when it would directly contradict the Bible. And she just fails to fails to bring those ones in. I just find it may not even been intentional, because a lot of people will be like, oh, you're ascribing intentionality to her. No. Like, some people just, that cognitive dissonance kicks in. They won't even consider anything past that.
I just want to say one more thing about the humanism, but I won't belabor it, because it'll become like the things that I'm talking to will come to us soon enough. But I've always gotten the impression, it's always seemed like rather clear to me that Virgil is the humanist. Right, he's the one who's providing the human wisdom, which is very valuable, especially all throughout the Inferno and throughout a good third of the Purgatory. Right, but human wisdom isn't enough to get you all the way up that mountain, and so to that degree, I don't get the impression that Dante is being a humanist, or if he is, I don't think that he considers humanism to be enough. Maybe humanist wisdom gets you some way up the mountain, right?
Well, he's
but
not
at some point you have to let go of that.
Yeah, he's not a secular humanist. He's a humanist believer. So this would be a change in this. And that wasn't my argumentation. I just think he, many years ahead of his time, pushed humanism in a positive way in ways that at that current time were not great.
Yeah, that was really more for anyone watching this video in the future, because like it's not obvious to everybody that Christians can be humanists, or that humanism like originates in Christianity.
Well,
to some degree,
I would argue that it doesn't originate in Christianity. It has an origin from a Christian, which is slightly differential, but yes.
It's not obvious to everybody that Christianity is a through point to it. To which humanism travels.
Yeah, and the people who denounce this, the anti-theist, humanists that go a little too far, in my opinion, instead of just being atheists, they're true anti-theist on this. They point to, nothing, it didn't come from them, it come from our evolution. There's a lot of it that comes from our evolution, but you cannot point to a time period in the last 1900 years where this wasn't an influence. And therefore, like, to denounce that influence on our progression through these things is ignorant. Like, you're being ahistorical at that point. He was a humanist believer. So yeah, he would say that you need God to get to heaven, but you don't need God to avoid hell.
Well.
Because purgatory, because
purgatory is only for the redeemed, technically. So we'll see limbo in the next couple.
And purgatory, going by biblical beliefs, is also for the good, never exposed, the people who were never exposed.
But he puts them in limbo. The unbaptized, virtuous pagans end up in limbo in hell.
Right.
That's Dante's interpretation, not original biblical interpretation.
But the only people that get raptured from limbo are the people that Jesus raptured himself after his death. So
he comes and fights for the Old Testament saints.
Right. So I mean, like you've got two separate things that are possibly true. So I mean, like, they're either going to be in limbo or purgatory, and it's all dependent on whether Jesus raptured them.
Here's the thing.
Or if you receive basic grace and baptism, or if there's a bunch of dependencies.
Yeah.
But I was also going to say you're forgetting the third option, which is what was believed by many biblical scholars up until the 19th century, that those that are in purgatory when the world is cast asunder and made anew with the faithful, that purgatory will be wiped and they will not be facing that eternal torment like those in hell. So they will not face the eternal torment. They will get a semblance of rest, just not eternal life. This is something that, like, at least to my understanding, I've yet to see a source that says otherwise. Since this was a belief for so long, this would be a belief that Dante held too, that those in purgatory are not doomed to torment unless you consider the separation from God a torment in and of itself.
But purgatory in the poem is going to be exclusively reserved for people who die in some sort of grace. Like the virtuous pagans that you're talking about end up in limbo in this story, and as Desperado said, like, we're going to see they'll tell the story of, this guy Jesus came down here and took a bunch of the other people who used to be here, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all these people who were untimely born but were given special measures of grace, and so Jesus comes and this is the harrowing of hell. But everyone in purgatory who's ascending the mountain has died in grace. They will someday see the beatific vision. But no one currently in Dante's hell will ever see the beatific vision. But
not in hell. That part I agreed with. I was just saying purgatory.
Yeah. So, but getting to purgatory, I think for Dante is it at least in the poem, and I think in his other writings as well, requires grace.
Yeah, but that grace was not always known to the people granted because they did not always have
knowledge.
And
he doesn't seem to care, right? But so you have all these people who are like literally we'll see this in a couple cantos, but in limbo, you have people who are like, yeah, man, if I'd known all this stuff before I got here, oh man, that would have been great. Oh well. Like he seems to be pretty comfortable. But
I wasn't, like I said, he's not an atheist. I'm not saying that.
The one question mark on this note, which will be fun to get to when we get to it, is I think there's at least one person in purgatory and at least two people in heaven or in paradise that Dante places there who received some sort of miraculous opportunity to repent post-death. There are exceptions. They're definitely not the rules. Everybody else.
The one that everyone thinks of.
Because
it's a really funny story. Trajan is what happens is Pope Gregory the Great really loved Trajan for whatever reason. And he prays and he prays and he prays and he prays. Like, he does this for years. And eventually God's like, okay, fine. I'll put Trajan in heaven. And then he does.
Yeah.
We'll read that when we get to there. But yeah, that is
but a
probably
question
the
on the
biggest
table
example.
For me, always has been, since Dante opens up these like literary, at least, questions of like, could someone receive a post-death opportunity to repent and receive grace? Why doesn't Virgil have that opportunity? Why is he sort of excluded from that?
Because
if he is really the
Virgil-
best, this could achieve.
Well, because the whole point to that, in my opinion, was that Dante knew that Virgil would never have accepted those.
Virgil is asked, and he answers that question. He says,
which is
we'll
why I get
that part.
Which is why I get the interpretation I do, by the way.
Yeah, he says that he lacks the 4 holy virtues. He only has the 3 holy. Yeah, he lacks the 3 holy virtues. He only has the 4 cardinal virtues, and therefore isn't capable of making it to the top of purgatory. Now, Dante seems to believe that's actually wrong, but Virgil's own lack of imagination doesn't allow him to believe that he's worthy of getting to heaven. So it's actually, in fact, this is true of everyone in hell. Everyone in hell could leave if they wanted to. Cerberus, in fact, guards people who are trying to enter hell. He doesn't guard it the other way. So anybody could walk right out of hell if they wanted to. But
the prison doors are open.
They would need hope.
Yeah. Well, and this is kind of what.
And he lacks hope.
And this is kind of what I was getting at, is when you get to those lines, you get the interpretation that Dante understands that Virgil, not just through, I don't think it's lack of imagination, but could not accept certain things as true because he doesn't believe them to be true. And if you do not believe them, it doesn't matter what you say. And that was what holds him back. His lack of belief, not his lack of imagination. Since, quite literally, the only unforgivable sin in the Bible is to not believe.
One thing I was going to say is when we're talking about, Dante turning back multiple times in his, his journey on like the shoreline there. The one thing I was going to say is like, this could be interpreted in a way in like a spiritual sense, but this could also be interpreted in a way of like an emotional feeling, because turning back multiple times like that, it elicits like a sense of fear of like stuff that's around you. And if Dante is in fear, then that means he's not in that depressive state, that state of defeatism before going into hell, which the people in hell already have about themselves in hell.
Yeah. That's also a very good.
So it could. That.
No, that is a very good point. To get going again.
Yeah, one of the things that sort of hides hope from us is fear, and clearly he's experiencing fear and self-doubt, and so at this point, hope isn't as strong as in him as it might be, which sort of makes sense for where he is in his journey.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Okay.
In fact, pretty soon he's going to encounter a sign that tells him to abandon all hope.
Could I don't want to cut the conversation off, but could I suggest whoever reads next that we just go ahead and read through all of the beasts that he encounters, like get to the point right before he meets Virgil? Because I think there's a kind of rhythm to it that is really neat. With all of these beasts, he keeps trying to climb the mountain, he keeps being opposed. I think that. I don't know. They cohere well together.
Yeah, I can stop at Superb was burned. Yeah, I can do that. The hour of time and the delicious season, but not so much that did not give me fear. A lion's aspect which appeared to me. He seemed as if against me he were coming, with head uplifted and with ravenous hunger, so that it seemed the air was afraid of him. And a she-wolf with all hungerings seemed to be laden with her meagerness, and many folk has cause to live forlorn. She brought upon so much heaviness with a fright from that her aspect came, and I that hope relinquished of the height. And as he who willingly acquires, the time comes that causes him to lose, who weeps in all his thoughts and is despondent. Even, God damn it, I hate when they do this. Even such made the beast without peace, which coming on against me by degrees, thrust me back thither where the sun is silent. Where I was rushing downward to the lowland, before mine eyes did one present himself, who seemed from long continued silence hoarse. When I beheld him, the desert vast, have pity on me, unto him I cried, whichever thou art, or shade or real man. He answered, not man, man once I was. Both my parents were of Lombardy, and Mutuans by country, both of them. Sub Julio was I born, though I was late, and lived at Rome under the good Augustus, during the time of false and lying gods. As poet was I, and I sang that just sons of Anchises, who came forth from Troy. After that, I, Lion the Superb, was burned. Why did you want to stop there and still before we get to like full Virgil?
So
I'm just curious.
I just wanted to get you've got the three B's, so we stopped after the first one, but all three of them together kind of come against him as he tries to climb. And beat him back, he says, until he gets back to, where the sun doesn't shine, basically. Mm-hmm. So we have this story so far of like, okay, I find myself in the dark wood. I sort of like run through it. I try to find my way out, and I see this mountain, and over the top of the mountain is peeking the sun, which is grace, and it's God, and that's the way I need to go. And he tries to go multiple times, and each time he's kind of beaten back. The first time is the panther, and then the lion, and then the she-wolf. And Virgil will come in and interpret those for us, which is nice. It's like Jesus with the parables sometimes, He tells a parable, the people are like, I don't get it, and Jesus is like, okay, you idiots, yes. Let me tell you what it means. And Virgil does that for him, because he's like, what were these ridiculous things that stopped me along the way? But basically, from what we've gotten so far of like the mountain, what's at the top, which is the rays of the sun, and how that mountain was for him this like moment of relief, like, oh, I've made it out of that forest from which no man has ever come back alive. Now I get to climb this mountain, and these three things push him back. And so then, which coming on against me by degrees, thrust me back thither. So these three things now are sort of like every time he tries to take a new path, they're pushing him back where the sun is silent. So now he's back in the shadows where he can't even see the sun anymore. And so he's rushing away from these things, and then he meets Virgil, and Virgil kind of comes to guide him. And so I think that whole section is really neat because, well, we'll have to read what Virgil says about them. But in the allegory, if this is just an individual soul level allegory of, I was not paying attention to, I guess, my spiritual life, right? And I wandered from the right path. And then I thought, oh, that over there, that's the right path. I want to get back on it. But I keep coming against obstacles. Well, what are those obstacles? Well, wonderful pagan Virgil is going to tell us.
Well, I
just think it's great.
I was going to go creature by creature because of the simple fact that each one is also supposed to symbolize a certain aspect of humanity. The leopard, the brutality, the viciousness, the violence. Mm-hmm. The lion, the strength, the pride, the willfulness, and the she-wolf, the utter and pure instinct of hunger and hunting. Like these aspects of these three creatures, as portrayed by the way they're worded, actually delineate essentially the seven disadvantages that are cited within the Bible, getting to essentially all the mortal sins, because it talks about the she-wolf in meagerness because she's hungry but doesn't hunt in the same ways as the others, so on and so forth. So it's pointing to the seven deadly sins and the seven disadvantages within this, and that's why I was going to go point by point, because I think Dante intentionally used these three images because of their symbolism within that particular time period within Europe. Because at this point, lions are damn near mythical to most people in Europe. Same thing with fucking leopards. Like they what the fuck is that? A cat? That's this? What, you mean little things that chase mice? They have no fucking clue what this. You know, like so, like you know, and the she wolf is something all of them know, and wolves at this point in most of Europe have been beaten back to near extinction in certain parts of the continent due to being hunted because of them being predators that hunted livestock and all this. So he's pointing out to like all of these through also historical means as well. And I consider that historically significant because Dante is not the only one to do it, but he is the only one to do it so prolifically in all of his works. Go ahead, Rich.
We will regard that as a prediction, right? Because since we know that Virgil's going to tell us what these three things mean, we can do a comparison when it happens.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, and this is just what I'm trying to get at, because of the multiple interpretations. Because again, even with what Virgil's saying, there's different layers to it with the way these are written, and I think it's trying to give this explanation as well that we can understand very easily now with hindsight and the ability to study multiple versions of the Bible, so on and so forth, to where we can actually show that he's trying to link to these things. Whereas in his time period, these were essentially thought bombs, thought grenades to throw into people's heads. And see what happened. I mean, to me, this is almost like Anarchist by Dante. Not literally, but because it is. He's trying to make people think about things that they're literally taught not to think about. You know, like...
There's an interesting aspect of that where, like, you know, you read a little bit from the Longfellow commentary on when he first encounters the leopard, that, you know, there's a political bent to his interpretation of that symbol, and I remember I don't have
Bianchi and Neri, both of their house sigils had leopards in it, which is why
And so I remember like the Mark Musa as well hitting each of these three beasts and primarily interpreting them as political allegories. And I'm not going to exclude the idea that Dante was using. I forget
the lion political allegory, by the way, just so you know.
But there's something, right? So there's something going on. But Virgil offers like something, I think, kind of different. And so, you know, maybe there's we'll see what Virgil. I don't know. Right. Who wants to go next? We've got more.
I have a question first of all, and this is for Jack. With the mysticism of the time that the people had towards leopards and lions, which of the creatures embodies sloth?
Out of those two, it would be the leopard. But
out of those three,
they attribute it to the wolf, but that is because of a misconception of the European times of how much wolves have been killed off at this point in history. If you're talking from the mystical aspect, the wolf is never considered slothful. From the mystical aspect, which I think is. Oh, go ahead. I was having a hard time understanding which of the creatures embodied sloth, because none of them seem to have embodied sloth. Well, they did with her meagerness, because a wolf a real wolf is always hunting, always looking for that sustenance that they need, because of the fact that they are apex predators that use quite a bit of calories just to function. So a meager wolf is a lazy wolf, and this is described by other medieval poets as a lazy wolf being the skinny wolf, etc. The wolf.
Although I was corrected by a Cistercian monk who was a professor of mine at the time, because I associated sloth with laziness as well. That is not what sloth is. Sloth is anything that distracts you from your spiritual duties. So, for instance, let's say this is the way he explained it to me. Let's say you decide to wash your car instead of going to Mass. You're not being lazy. Washing your car is a physical activity. You probably would work less hard going to Mass, right? But you're avoiding your spiritual duty, and you're doing something else instead. And so washing your car would be sloth. Because you're avoiding your spiritual duty.
So what you're saying is that the Catholics persecuted against people with ADHD and ADD.
Well, there's that. But I've heard that interpretation too. That was good. But I've heard that interpretation too. But the other portion of this that I've heard is that it is also laziness, because laziness is a willful choice to essentially not do our duty to be better today than we were yesterday. Which is also a spiritual duty of ours. So, like, depends on what side of Catholicism.
I mean,
you
laziness
talk to.
can certainly manifest itself in sloth, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you can be lazy in ways that are not slothful, and slothful in ways that are not lazy.
Well, and I think that's why when you tie slothful to the lazy wolf, what is their reason for existence in this time period to non-mystical thinkers? It's to eat, to kill, to raise more things to eat and kill shit. So, like, to them, a lazy wolf, a slothful wolf, is a wolf not holding.
Oh, is she hungry because she hasn't been hunting?
My personal opinion, and I do not have any historical relevance for this. This is just the way I read it. Was the meagerness was meant to intent all the people she is eating have like meager souls. Therefore, anybody who has made it to this point and that try to push against her and are killed by her, they have not been sustenance for her. Whereas the lion and the leopard, being more proactive in their approaches to taking out the intruders, have been fulfilled by the more eager souls. She takes out the stragglers who try to find every path but the lion and the leopard. I mean, that again, this is my interpretation with the way I read it. This is, for those watching, this is the interpretation of an autodidactic chef. Take it for what you will. But like this is like getting into where we're about to get into Virgil. Like this is now when you get to Virgil, Dante loved Virgil. This is something that we now understand on a historical level. Like he loved him in a way that was more than just like as a mentor or a thought provider. He actually loved this person body and soul, even though they were a pagan, and that was something that he actually writes in certain other of his works, confessions to having guilt over. So it's one of those things that he is also, at least in my eyes, going to be pushing his own personal guilts onto Virgil as a projection for the elements of the story. Because there are certain elements to Dante's life which we don't know historically, but in his writings he expresses guilt towards actions that he never specifically states what they were. So I think some of them were things like being beloved of pagans, you know, or a beloved to a pagan type thing. Or as some more modern scholars interpret, and I think they're misinterpreting, they attribute it to homosexuality, which we have no evidence of. He may have been, but we have zero evidence to base that on. That's entirely suppositional. You muted yourself, Rich.
So I'm looking at the Italian here because there's one little thing that I was curious about. What Longfellow says, I, the hope relinquished of the height. I liked first I thought relinquished of the height like means he cowered, like he got shorter. He relinquished his height. Then I thought, okay, no, he's relinquishing going up the mountain. Like he started to go up the mountain, but then he had to retreat. But then I looked at the Italian, and it's l'avarice via abbandonai. So I abandoned the veracity. I abandoned the truth. Basically, is what he's saying. This may be a pun, right?
Yes,
it may be.
It's a double entendre for the high ground and the truth.
Right. So the fact that he's coming down means this backs up what Eucharist told us about what the sun is, right? Because if you're going up, you're going towards the sun, you're going towards those rays, but then you're abandoning those rays, which means you're abandoning the truth.
Yeah, that's perfect. And do you want to read next, Rich, or do you want one of us to go?
Yeah, I don't mind going. Let's see. I'm sorry. What line were we on?
We left off after the lion. After that, lion, the superb was burned. And that's by the way, that was
what was the line? What was the line?
I don't remember the exact number. It's the one with as a poet.
75.
As a poet, yeah. Sorry, I don't.
75. Okay. So before we get to 76, I just wanted to, because there were more lines there that we haven't addressed. Well, where does he say? Oh yeah, he says both of his parents were from Lombardy.
Yeah, and by country Mantuans.
They're both Mantuans, and yeah, they both came from Lombardy. Of Lombardy, but they were Manchu. Are those different places, or is that just two different ways of explaining the same place?
One means their ethnicity. They were born by the country, both of them. And then parents were of Lombardy. This is where they grew up, where they lived, etc. So this is expressing where they are from and what ethnicity they are. It also is. It is also further delineated by the fact that he was born sub Julio.
Yeah. I was curious, by the way, because the way that he phrases this, sub Julio, I was born though it was late. Sayers says sub Julio, born though late in time, and her commentary on that says basically she takes him to mean like I was born under Julius Caesar, but too late to really appreciate Julius Caesar died when he was younger, whatever. But I was curious that the phrasing was intentional riff to, because it had echoes in my mind of what Paul says about his calling as an apostle, where he says, and Jesus appeared to the 12 and then to all these people, and lastly to me as one untimely born. But it's not, it turns out, because Paul phrases it quite differently. The way he phrases it in the Greek literally means a miscarriage or an abortion that happens. Like you've given birth to a premature child, effectively. But I was born at an untimely time, basically, is the repetition that he uses. So it's not the same language, but I was curious if it was. So if anybody else was curious, it has no relationship.
I kind of figured you would be, just to be honest with you. I had looked that up myself.
It just sounded similar. I was like, is he riffing on Paul here? Is he saying like I was untimely born for not being, at the height of Julius?
Actually,
could be both.
Well, no, actually, the way I interpret it was not the interpretation of Paul, but of Thomas. Thomas Aquinas, mind you. And that's where I thought he got the interpretation, which I have to go back and reread Thomas. It's been several fucking years since I've read Thomas, but I think Thomas was talking about Paul. So, tangentially, you're right. It just say it.
Okay.
Well, this is interesting.
I'm sorry. I think it got.
No, it was a good tangent.
Mantua is pretty close to Lombardy. Like it's not particularly far away.
That's what I'm saying. But they're talking ethnicity.
Today they would.
People.
Like Lombardy today would be considered a suburb of Milan, just to be modern about it. And Mantua is pretty much equidistant between Milan and Bologna. So I would say probably, because Milan's a much bigger city, it would today also be considered at least an exurb of Milan. So sort of like Milan would have been a sort of big cultural influence on both of those regions. But I'm not sure what the I'm sure he's trying to highlight the differences between them.
Because Virgil was a suburbanite.
Well, no, because at this time you have to remember Lombardy was not a city. Lombardy was a region that had very recently stopped being a kingdom. I had to pull up the map to make sure I was remembering correctly. So this is a whole region, like Tuscany is a region.
It still is.
Yeah. So it wouldn't be a suburb. Milan would be part of Lombardy at this point. By this.
Yeah, that's why I said today. Today, like when I was there, it was very much considered a suburb of Milan, even though it was its own region.
Yeah.
Just like I once lived in New Jersey, but I was considered to be in a suburb of Philly.
Yeah. Okay. It's just because I remember the kingdom.
But that's
of
all
Lombardy.
21st century shit.
Yeah, I just remembered the kingdom of Lombardy,
that,
so I had to go look up if it was still shown on the maps as the kingdom of Lombardy in Dante's time, and it would be. It just wouldn't be shown as the kingdom of Lombardy. It would just be shown as the region of Lombardy, like the region of Tuscany, because these were still essentially city-states. Not literally, but might as well be for how autonomous they were to each other.
Does Dorothy say anything about the difference between those two parts of Italy?
Let me see. Not. Okay.
Not in the notes here.
Well, okay. Technically, she doesn't talk about it specifically, But where she talks about a particular reference at 37 in his native tongue according to tradition, so kinda, but only in the abstract of like location from where tradition of his native sign, where he's born, so on and so forth. Like, it's kinda, but like you have to basically be an uber nerd to even catch it. So that Sayers is referencing anything to do with the differences, and it has nothing to do with the politics or language. It just has to do with the native sign, because...
Although it is interesting to note that if you do look at that footnote, it mentions that it is currently Good Friday.
Mm-hmm.
Which is...
Oh yeah, that's the good thing about the Sayers translation, is it keeps track of the dates across the top as he proceeds through hell. So he goes down in Good Friday, and he does ascend on Easter Sunday.
Yeah.
So.
It's just it's interesting because, like, I believe, and this is, I don't have evidence for this either, I believe Sayers was translating this more from a theological mindset, and it's not a bad thing, by the way. But I think because of that, she focuses more heavily on that than the political nature of the social commentary that Dante was using. Either A, because she just focused on the theology because that was her primary focus, or B, because she may not have actually known the like political intrigue and like nuances of the region at this time, because that's really fucking hard to research even in modern times with computers and shit.
That's
like,
the sort of thing Musa focuses on there.
Yeah, so like maybe that's why it is. But so like when we look at this, we can bring up some of the references that Sayer either may not have been aware of because of, you know, time period, or that she may not have focused on because of her own primary motivation of translating this. But yeah, and the last thing I want to say before we go on, the eye lion, the superb, was burned. That is the reason why I attributed pride to the lion, is because he also self-identifies with the lion in the translation, which it doesn't make sense to me unless he's also attributing pride to himself. It's the only way I can interpret that. And either anybody a disagreement or other interpretation of that portion before we move on? Okay, Rich?
Yeah. Oh, just the other thing. The son of Anchises is that's
Aeneas.
Aeneas.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't believe I mispronounced that the first time I read it. I felt like an
Which
asshole.
he did know about Aeneas. Like his references to Aeneas are going to be accurate because they did have Virgil at that time, which is why he loves Virgil, because Virgil is as close as they could get to Dante.
So, yeah.
All they know, to Homer. Everyone like sort of dreams about being able to read Homer, but they can't because that's been lost to the Western world.
By the way, I was just looking up on because you brought that up earlier, but it's Boccaccio and one other person who, shortly before Dante dies, and then the project concludes shortly after Dante dies, commission someone to translate the sort of newly rediscovered Odyssey out of Greek into Latin. And so we still have their Latin translation, but it was literally Dante dies like just a few years before that sort of gets mainstream traction again, which is kind of interesting.
Right. Yeah. Before he can find out that, I guess he never finds out how wrong he was about Odysseus.
Yeah. Although, well, I think I'll be interested to reread that because I seem to remember Sayers having a very interesting translation of that, interpreting it not so much as ignorance, but like an intentional choice. But I think you're right. Just historically, he was ignorant. But there's, I'm excited to get back to that.
Well, yeah, no, that's what I was kind of talking about. There's just going to be certain things that Sayers didn't know, and she is going to do her best case interpretation. She didn't know he was truly ignorant of it. She didn't realize that it was 10 years after his death that it was found, so on and so forth. And how could he know before then? There is no way to do so outside of a special pleading of divine inspiration. And I don't know about you, I've never seen that claim anywhere outside of Sayers, as far as like him having that knowledge.
Yeah, I don't. I'd have to dig.
Because she already did.
I feel like I think she has a pretty good understanding of, because like, yeah, I mean, she's pretty steeped in the medieval stuff. I think she would know. Like, I think she talks about, in the places I've seen her talk about Augustine, she's aware of Augustine, not really actually having access to Plato and things. I think she was kind of aware of what was available and what wasn't. So I may be misremembering what she actually says about it. So I don't want to attribute anything to her until we get there. I just like my memory of it is slightly different.
I've had some slight I've had some slight disagreements with her already. So like I can understand if this is just one of those ones where it's like maybe she just didn't know, because like I don't want to attribute like malice to it, because like that's just silly. Like she seems to be doing her best interpretation of everything she's doing. So it's like it may just be she thought he knew. Just like a lot of people will go back and attribute, back before Columbus, everybody thought the world was flat. No, we didn't, asshole. We thought the world was a ball since 3200 BCE.
It was a pear. The world was a pear.
It's a donut, okay?
Well, but that's my point. It's like
the Earth was a cube.
Yes.
Yes, the Borg have made it. But that's
no, it's a cosmic cube.
But that's just kind of where I'm getting at. Is like we always knew this, but it was later interpretations where certain people didn't know. They were taught something else and did their best faith interpretation. Like they weren't trying to be malicious about some of these interpretations. It's just what they thought. And so when we get into this misinterpretation, everybody thought the world was flat. Okay, please explain to me how we knew even the orbits of the planets were ellipses before that, please. Please.
Yeah, or rough calculation of the circumference of the Earth since the Ptolemaic times.
Yeah, the Ptolemaic model literally revolves on ball Earth. Like, please explain.
Right.
But okay, sorry, we diverged.
Okay, so I'd like to. I'd like to go back because Virgil shows up, and I don't want to kind of skip over that because we were thinking about the beasts when you were reading, and
you want to go back a little bit? That's fine. I
want to go back to 61.
Yeah, I was going to say just read. I think it was to 87 is where it gets to before Behold the Beast, because I think we'll want to talk about that section before then.
We could even end at 78 because that's when that's when the quotes end.
Okay.
Right? So I just want to read the whole quote. So I'm going to start at 61, which is the approach.
Okay.
While I was rushing downward to the lowland, before mine eyes did see one present himself, who seemed from a long continued silence hoarse. When I beheld him in the desert vast, and then Dante says, "Have pity on me," unto him I cried, "whiche'er thou art, or shade, or real man." He answered me, "Not man. Man once I was, and both my parents were of Lombardy, and Mantuans by country, both of them. Sub Julio was I born, though it was late, and lived at Rome under the good Augustus, during the time of the false and lying gods. A poet was I, and I sang that just son of Anchises, who came forth from Troy, after that lion the superb was born. But thou, why goest back to such annoyance? Why climbest thou not the mount delectable, which is the source of cause and every joy?" What I like about this in particular was when he says that I sang the just son of Anchises, because this is how all of those old, like, ancient epic poems begin, which is by them doing the invocation to the muse, so that they can then sing whatever story it is that they're going to sing. And of course, Virgil sings, about the son of Anchises that's mentioned here. Right?
Mm-hmm.
There's that, and that the reason I wanted you to keep going before we get to because of this piece, because the fact is, like, well, there's that's important. The sub Julio was I born, like, that is setting also like a connotation of like the time period of what Virgil is, and Virgil's supposed to know, because in the time period Dante
was born under
like,
Julius Caesar,
but what I mean is, with people in the time period of Dante's writing, this would have significance to them, because this is at this time period considered the golden age of Rome. It was before we understood, not quite so much, but he was born within the golden age of Rome under the lying gods. That is a major point in history that is considered, in this particular point, the most significant achievement of man outside of the church, I should say.
I also like the little touch that his voice is hoarse because he hasn't spoken in so long.
Because so few have
Because
gotten
where
to
he's
there.
been residing for all of this time, I guess there is no speech.
No, where he's been residing, nobody has gotten to for so long, is how I interpreted that. It took until Dante, to get to him, essentially. Nobody else, everybody else got ate by the leopard, the lion, and the wolf.
Right, but I mean, he literally hasn't had an opportunity to speak to a mortal.
Yeah.
And I will say this also, from a humanist perspective, also delineates that Virgil was so sound of mind that he was able to survive the solitude for this long as well, without even falling to speech to himself, which was a known tendency of people to do even in this time period. So the fact that Dante is giving that level of mental strength to Virgil also is an attribution of his love, in my opinion. Because
do you want me to keep reading?
Yeah, I was going to say let's get to.
You wanted me to go to 87?
Yeah, because then we get into a big long part that we're going to also have to talk about after that.
Okay. Now art thou Virgilius, and that fountain which spreads so abroad, so wide a river of speech. I made response to him with a bashful forehead. O of the other poets' honor and light, avail me the long study and great love that have impelled me to explore thy volume. Thou art my master, and my author thou. Thou art alone, the one from whom I took the beautiful style that has done honor to me.
Yeah. Now, see, and this is why I wanted you to go to here, because this is where he, this gets Virgil's response quite literally about his love for this person, because this was his window to the past. And, this again pulls me to Dante.
And he keeps looking back.
Yep. Dante's tendency to always try to perceive, albeit, to the limits of his ability, of past, present, and future, and all decisions and all thoughts he's taking, which is, according to the way he writes this, something he gets from Virgil. And now we can go into a Virgil, like the Aeneid's another time, but I actually agree with him. From the way that he gets it, it wasn't just the style. It was quite also this tendency to look at past, present, and future and all things, to look at it from as many angles as possible, to create the most cohesive understanding and ability to convey the most meaning in the least amount of words. That multi-interpretation where all of them are right and all were intended, which is very, very hard to do so intentionally, as Despy and I can tell you. It's hard to do that when you're absolutely intending to do it as a writer, let alone to do it so consistently through a work this long. Now, you, Chris, do you want to go, or you want Despy or I to go next?
Sure, I'll go. Let's see. Just but before I get there, I do think again, to your humanist credit, this is, I think, the passage that the sort of Dante critics through the ages look to, among others, that sort of put him more in the humanist than the Christian humanist camp in their minds, where he's like, you alone are the one I took this style from. You alone are the inspiration for the, it's a sort of vaunted praise.
I think they're wrong to do so, because he was he was a Christian secular humanist. Yeah. Because he did believe outside of he did believe that there should be a government outside of the church as well. So again, he's all of these things, but he was still a Christian. You can't take that away just because he was these other things too. And I think too many of the atheists and anti-theists try to.
But also, this is the difference between speaker and author, right? The character of Dante it says "you alone," but I'm not sure that the author, who is Dante, would say that.
Yeah.
Well, and the author himself may be meaning it about the writing style and the tendency to look at past, present, and future, but not overall inspiration, because again, Christian, he took inspiration from God as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
How far should I go from there?
Honestly, he goes on for quite a while. I'd say Twixt Feltro and Feltro shall his nation be should be good. Because I'm looking at the
Just give a number.
I don't have
down
the
to
numbers
105. I see it.
105.
Yeah, I don't have the Longfellow with numbers. I have the Longfellow published version because it's nice.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm just reading it from the Dartmouth, which is wonderful for the numbers. Okay. So this is still Dante speaking. Behold the beast, for which I have turned back. Do thou protect me from her, famous sage, for she doth make my veins and pulses tremble. Virgil begins. Thee it behooves to take another road, responded he, when he beheld me weeping, if from this savage place thou wouldst escape. Because this beast at which thou criest out suffers not anyone to pass her way, but so doth harass him that she destroys him, and has a nature so malign and ruthless that never doth she glut her greedy will, and after food is hungrier than before. Many the animals with whom she weds, and more they shall be still, until the greyhound comes, who shall make her perish in her pain. He shall not feed on either earth or pelf, but upon wisdom, and on love and virtue. Twixt Feltro and Feltro shall his nation be.
Yeah.
We
had to explain Feltro, which is why I wanted to stop here.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, I was just going to say before we get to Feltro, there's a line here that I have fan fiction in my head now. Okay, this is completely implausible, but I've decided to believe it. I at least will appreciate this comparison. But the translation Sayers gives this is from 94 to 100. The savage brute that makes thee cry for dread lets no man pass this road of hers, but still trammels him till at last she lays him dead. Vicious her nature is, and framed for ill. When crammed, she craves more fiercely than before. Wonderful alliteration there. Her raging greed can never gorge its fill. And so there's this image of a she-wolf who is this like bloodthirsty thing who is insatiable, and when it starts feeding, will continue feeding and simply cannot stop. This was originally published by Penguin in 1948. Dorothy Sayers is friends with C.S. Lewis, and by the end of 1949, C.S. Lewis had finished writing Prince Caspian. And if any of you guys have read Prince Caspian, there's a scene with a werewolf in the chambers right above the stone table where the werewolf gives this line of, I can lie 100 nights on the ice and not freeze. I can drink a river of blood and not burst. And I just want to believe that Lewis took some inspiration from the she-wolf, maybe just in Dante generally, but maybe in this particular translation of that line that I like.
Well,
so
yeah,
much.
no,
So,
and that's actually a good point, because this is where both sloth and gluttony were attributed within the same beast in the before tercet, because of the fact that she can never get her fill, and this is where my interpretation is she can't, because she is the one who gets the least. She is the one who gets the least fulfilled souls, because all of the others feel that they can take on the lion and the leopard.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Hence why she's also in her meagerness. Again, reading through Canto 1 for over 2 months now and to get ready for this, I pulled a lot of it, and this is what I pull from John Ciardi, because of the fact that he points out that this juxtaposition Dante uses quite literally all the time, yet he only does it for the one beast, and that is to show that she encompasses both the most extreme of gluttony, therefore to eat until you can burst, but also the sloth, because she's too lazy to hunt the more fulfilled souls, and instead waits for them to come to her. And Feltro,
okay, but
for those
you want to take
you
us on Feltro and Feltro?
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Okay, Feltro is a type of cloth. People today will look at that and just think felt, and that's slightly accurate, because what modern felt is the evolution of this. But ancient Feltro was just pressed together. So quite literally, they wouldn't card the wool, they wouldn't do any of that shit. They would literally just shear the sheep and then stick it between two plates and rocks and shit.
Hey, look what I have here. I have felt beaver hat that's pressed beaver felt.
Well, yeah, but the difference between modern felt and Feltro was the production process. This was the reason that he said betwixt Feltro and Feltro. He's trying to delineate between the roughest of the rough cloth, between the cheapest, most on process garment, etc., which is trying to delineate either, at least in my eyes, a humbleness by choice, or a poverty by birth. Because I don't know enough of Virgil's history, I don't know which it is. Because that's like, I think that's part of that history that's just too much interpretation, not enough evidence. Like, I don't know which one he's trying to elicit here, but if it's both, that's even more beautiful to me. Because he's trying to show that even in his poverty, he also had like a chosen humbleness, which would make Virgil
all I'm going to say
powerful.
Is pressed wool falls apart pretty easily.
I just know this because like this is something that is not feltro, but the same process of fabric is enumerated within the Enuma Elish. About like trying to delineate the cheapest fabric, the on-dyed, the on-carded, hey, here you go, it will cover you. Trying to delineate like a station, and that like I think that's what he's trying to do here, because especially in this time period, hierarchy and caste systems are a little bit rigid in Europe.
So when I see the twixt feltro, what I'm thinking is that like when they're saying twixt feltro, they're talking about additives being added to the felt that aren't necessarily made of animal fur, in order to make the the garment. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, which would again make it even more cheaply made.
Right, and fall apart a lot easier.
And the reason I think that this is important, because this shows that Dante's lack of hubris. He can love the lowest of the low to the highest point, and he does not understand why that love is not enough. Like that.
I have a question. Ical, do you have the Mark Musa translation around you anywhere? Because I've lost mine.
I would have to go look for it. I do have it somewhere in here, but I didn't see it as I was coming right away.
I just love the line we're on. I think this is correct as far as everything I understand. Sayers mentions that there's another strain of interpretation, and I think it's the strain of interpretation that Musa picks up. She says the Greyhound is this sort of oft-debated figure, and for some people, he sort of represents in Dante's story a kind of political savior. And if it is a political savior, there's an idea that between Feltro and Feltro, or betwixt Feltro and Feltro, is a reference to a geographical region between the Felter and Venetia and Montefeltro and Romagna. And I think that's the line that Musa picks up. But Sayers is more in the line exactly what Jacanda said, like that she thinks it's a reference to poverty of the cloth, and she says actually one way that she might translate it instead is in a cloth of frieze, this cheap cloth, his people shall be found. So like the people associated with the Savior Greyhound are the lowest of the low, like you were saying. I like that more.
Well, but the thing is like I think Sayers picks up on this because it's both intense. Now I didn't know the history of the two locations, so like I'll have to dig into that as we go. Like before.
Yeah, but she says it's contested, and I think she thinks it's bullshit, which it probably is. So.
Well, but it may not. It may be one of those things, the multiple interpretations, and because of our recency bias and lack of like integral knowledge of that time period on a day-to-day basis, that it may not have been bullshit. It's just she doesn't have the evidence to back it up, so she's skeptical.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I went to Dante's Worlds, and there's a reference here where they say there may be some political meaning here. A she-wolf nursed the legendary founders of Rome, Romulus and Remus, and thus came to stand as a symbol of the city. So if the she-wolf is emaciated, right, then she's not going to have anything to give. Right?
There's the Musa translation for you in the chat.
Okay, so I think what he wants is the Musa apparatus.
Wait, no, hang on. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Did you find it?
Well, no, this is either just a rhyme or it's a play on words. The Italian for Greyhound is Veltro with a V, and so in line 101 he's saying until the Veltro comes and his nation shall be between Feltro and Feltro. And further down the Dante's World thing says that this is the first of several enigmatic prophecies in the poem to a savior figure who will come to redirect the world to the path of truth. Dante may be alluding to one of his political benefactors. One of his benefactors was Ken Grande, which means big dog. But maybe he just means
I don't know how that applies to a
individual.
greyhound, but all right.
Well, that's fair. Anyway, sorry, you were.
No,
sorry,
that was a good point.
You
that
were,
was a good point.
No, I mean, no. I mean, dogs are symbolically wolves, right? I mean, there's a relation there, and there's a lot of people make those comparisons all the time. So I can see somebody who's named after a dog being represented by a wolf.
We're also talking about 13th century Italy at this time. I don't think the breed greyhound was around at that time, and the word hound had a completely different meaning.
Yeah, actually, I do not know that. Let me.
Although I don't know what the well, then we'd need to look at the Italian, right?
Right.
Yeah. So it's Veltro in Italian, but I wonder what the history of this breed is.
The majority of dog breeds are very recent, if I'm not mistaken. They're not they don't go back more than
hang on,
3 or 4 centuries.
Greyhounds are older though, because there's the line in Henry V where before they're charging once more into the breech speech where he sees I see you something like greyhounds in the slip. Like they were racing greyhounds in England in Shakespeare's time, at least. I know that's hundreds of years later, but so at least by the 16 teens, we have greyhounds in the slip that are racing dogs.
Yeah, greyhounds.
But the word for the she wolf is lupa.
Yeah, but
no, we're talking about the greyhound that Virgil mentions later on, where he says, "So the greyhound will hunt the wolf in cities far and wide eventually."
Yes, I'm looking at it right now. The origins of the greyhound are actually traced back to, I'm going to butcher this, Catalhuyuk site in Turkey, 6000 BC.
They're freaking old.
Finding a greyhound-like dog in a funeral vase from a town of Fusa in Iran, or in a rock art of Tassili, dated 5000 to 2000 BCE, indicated that the greyhound is indeed one of the oldest breeds of dog. Ancient skeletal remains of dogs identified as being of the greyhound Saluki form were excavated from Tel Brak in modern Syria and dated to approximately 4,000 years ago.
The only reason why I say that is linguistically speaking, when we're talking about things that were either written in Middle English or Shakespearean times, when you look at the word hound, they're not necessarily referring to a breed of dog. They're referring to a dog in general.
No,
yeah,
I understand that.
Here's a painting from the 1400s of racing greyhounds, or hunting greyhounds. That's wild.
Yeah, what I was looking at though is the name at this time would not have been greyhound. That's the later translation of it. It would have been Salukis. That's why they separate greyhound Saluki's form, because that is what it was called in Iran at that time when these dog breeds were found.
It looks like they're literally thousands of years old, which is just wild. Well, I mean, because I would have had the same intuition as Desperado. That
domesticated dogs was separated off from the Asiatic wolf in 13,000 BCE, 14,000. It was a long time before this, so yeah, they had plenty of time to make breeds.
So I'm sure this is a coincidence, but who shall make her perish in pain? The Italian is morire con doglia.
Yeah, I'm sure that part is a slight
coincidence.
Yeah, it's like
but
coincidence,
still,
but it is
funny.
Okay, now where was back to this?
I'm sorry.
Well, let's see, and the reason I stopped there because it says the next lines are going to get into Camilla and all this. So the reason I stopped there because I didn't even know the town and town history, but I knew there was other contentions around this beyond just the poverty and the humility. So as you look at this again, for those still watching, this is one of these situations where it may be a trick question on the test. It may literally your professor may give you an answer where all 4 of the answers are right. Mm-hmm. And as I have a professor in the room with me, how often do you do that to your students, Eucharist?
Unfortunately, almost never, because they would riot. I'm too nice of a professor to give them too many trick questions.
Oh no, I would be one of those people that gives a trick. Well, because at that it's a trick question in the other way. All of them are right.
Right.
So one thing I'd like to point out, I do have to go in about 15 minutes.
Okay.
So That's
Should
kind
we
of
read
hard
to the
limit.
end then? And then
4 a.m. is my hard limit.
okay.
Yeah,
Let's read to the end at
yeah,
least,
we're-
and then we
yeah,
can.
Yeah, we're almost there. Do you want to take over, Despy? We're at,
Sure.
Of that low Italy shall be the savior. Shall he be the savior? I should say.
What's the
Of
number?
Okay, 106. Of that low Italy shall he be the savior, on whose account the maid Camellia died. Euryale? What's that?
Euralis.
Euralis, Turnus, Nisus, of their wounds. Through every city shall he hunt her down until he hath driven her back to hell. There from whence envy first did let her loose. Therefore I think and judge it for thy best. Thou follow me, and I will be thy guide. And lead thee hence through the eternal place where thou shalt hear the desperate lamentations, shalt see the ancient spirits disconsolate, who cry out each one.
No big deal.
Yeah, who cry out each one for the second death. And thou shalt see those who contended are within the fire, because they hope to come wherever it may be to the blessed people. To whom then, if thou wishest to ascend, a soul shall be for that than I more worthy. With her at my departure I will leave thee, because the emperor who reigns above, in that I was rebellious to his law, wills that through me none come into his city. He governs everywhere, and there he reigns. There is his city and his lofty throne. O happy he whom thereto he elects. And I to him, poet, I thee entreat. By the same God whom thou didst never know, so that I may escape this woe and worse, thou wouldst conduct me there where thou hast said, that I may see the portal of St. Peter, and those thou makest so disconsolate. Then he moved on, and I behind him followed.
All right.
Yeah. Oh.
So
Nice way to bring it home.
I love this section because it gives you the cliff notes of the whole rest of the poem, all three parts. So he says, I judge it best for thou to follow me, and I will be thy guide and lead thee hence through the eternal place where you will hear the desperate lamentations. We're going to go through hell together. And then he says after that.
Sorry, I couldn't.
Yes.
I couldn't help it after the word got said again.
This is important though for line
Where you
119
got it
because
from?
most of us have the mental image again of a particular sect of Christianity of hell itself as the fire, which it's not technically yet. That's the second death that he's talking about in the final judgment. The fire that he describes at line 119 is purgatorial fire. It's purging or purifying fire. So when you get to the line where he says, and then you will see those who contented are within the fire because they hope to come whene'er it may be to the blessed people. First, you're going to see the disconsolate who only wish for the second death. Second, you're going to find those people who, as Aiko were saying earlier, they have hope because they're climbing Mount Purgatory. And whenever it may be 1,000 years from now, but someday they will come to the blessed people. And in order for you to see those blessed people, then I have to pass you over to someone more worthy than I, and that's going to be Beatrice, who I'm sure we'll talk about plenty. Yes. And she can guide you through heaven because I can't go there. God has willed it so that no one can come into heaven through me. They can only come through this door of St. Peter, or really Jesus, ultimately.
Well, and I wanted to go back a little bit further, because Euralis, Turnus, and Nisus, the reason that they bring up the maid Camilla and these three particular characters, this is, again, the political commentary of the time. He is quite literally trying to point out to members of, like, prominent families within the country that this would apply to, that he sees them within these living deaths of purgatory, essentially condemning themselves to it through their actions. This is something that, again, Charity, it's one of these things that without the extremely nuanced history of the Italian families, like this kind of goes like kind of washed over, but would have been very understood in their time. So again, Dante pissed off a lot of people writing this shit, which again, when you piss off the church and a lot of rich families, it tends to get you not liked very much by certain people. And that's like, this is something that shows his, in my opinion, bravery, because quite literally he was writing something that could have gotten him sentenced to death. Just in this first canto, he has committed multiple heresies, according to the church at this time period. So again, like, and this is something I want to ask everybody, what drives somebody in a time period where, quite literally, even though he is a believer, he understands that it is an oppressive culture, to take that level of risk? Whoever wants to go first.
Well, I mean, the way it was presented to me the first time I read it in the lectures that I attended, it was essentially revenge. He saw the system was essentially broken. He wanted to sort of, on one level, sort of like shout his disdain to the system that he lived in.
Lamentation.
But at the same time, yeah. But at the same time, like, address a broken system and figure out, like there. Of course, he like
So would
his
you
anger
attribute
at the
this to
system is something he's.
activism
Well, certainly, I think there was. I've always had a political interpretation of this, because if you read De Monarchia, he's saying in prose what he says here in poetry, which is that that the people, that the humans that are in charge of the church, are not always going to be the best interpreters of the divine, or at least their divine authority doesn't translate well to political authority. And I think he makes that argument here, and I think he makes the argument in De Monarchia.
Well, see, this is why I asked if you think it elevates all the way to activism, because most historians view it as only social commentary, and I am actually kind of torn between the two. I don't know which side it falls on.
I think social commentary. It's weird to hear the term only social commentary, because social commentary is political. Like it.
Well, but it's not.
If you're commenting
necessarily
on
meant to be-
society.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily meant to be activism. Sometimes it can just be, we're trying to show the historical record, and that's why a lot of historians, I think, through their own like.
Well, I think he wouldn't have
lens.
written De Monarchia if that were the case.
Okay, so yeah, you think it was activism? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Well,
he's
vengeance
advocating
leading to
for a better
activism.
way of doing things.
Yeah, vengeance leading to activism, but
I mean, I don't think it ends at vengeance, right? Like, I think that he has this sort of impulse in him to be angry, and the ways in which he expresses that anger is in hell, right? It's not in the other two works, or the other two, what do they call them? Does he call them books, like 3 books?
No, they were split into books by other people. Originally, this is a single work.
Yeah.
It was split into books later.
Published. Let's see.
I mean, it's a canto, and then it's 33 canto.
Yeah.
Well, but it was considered a singular work by Dante.
Yeah.
And that's why I say we split it into books for ease, and essentially to mark those delineating lines.
I mean, Fellowship of the Ring is a single book, right? But there's 2 books inside of it.
Yeah.
There's book 1 and book 2.
Yeah, same kind of thing.
That whole thing was also supposed to be one work, but the publishers didn't like that, which is typically how it goes.
I will say. Would you want to pick up a fucking 1,500?
The binding, yeah, would have been amazing.
Yeah. Dude, I've seen singular editions of Lord of the Rings that use like onion skin paper like a Bible does, and I would totally read that any day. It's amazing. It's as thin as a Bible basically, which is portable sometimes, and you can have the whole thing in one volume. I would agree with iCow that like I think this is something that Sayers gets really well in her commentary early on. She's like, all these people who basically have only encountered Dante through the Inferno find him bitter and grim and gloomy. That's the description that a lot of people give him. And she says, yeah, he dips into that because that's a thing that he experienced in his life. But she says basically, if you start from his first published work, which is the Via Nuova, the new life, and then the Convivio, and then finally the comedy, she says you basically see early Dante is enraptured with God, with beauty, with love, with all of these wonderful things. In the Convivio, he's a pessimistic bastard because everything is going wrong in his life. And then in the comedy, he concludes with two full, we call them books, 2 full books of hope, effectively. That this first one is a path he has to go down because he did experience what we would maybe call a dark night of the soul in his life. And then he went on from that to have hope. And so Sayers quotes in the introduction on page 50 from what Beatrice says about Dante in the Paradiso, the church militant has no son more full of hope than he. And she says that, comes out through the text. And he's saying that of himself through the character Beatrice, that he has this theological virtue of hope that has pulled him out of that dark wood because he found the right path again. And so she says, while reading it, we must always remember that the experience and the story lead through that realm, hell, to the earthly paradise, and then beyond it to the dancing heaven of light, which seemed to make smile the whole universe. So we're going to see first the worst parts of humanity, then we're going to see the potential earthly paradise. Like we see Virgil at the top of Mount Purgatory, the best that humanity can achieve, and we're going to see some political analogies of that. And then we're going to see the heavenly city and the beatific vision and all of these wonderful things that go beyond that.
Well, that's a great point, and kind of draws back to, again, it's activism at that point. He is doing activism that hope for a better time is the message of this story in a nutshell.
In a partial, yeah. I think one of the really good ways to read
highly
the comedy is
reductive to anybody watching this. That would do not put that on a test. You will get marked wrong.
No, I think one of the most convincing interpretations I heard of this was from the professor who introduced me to this. She's a real medievalist. She knows this stuff backwards and forwards. And she takes this there is absolutely all this political meaning. Like, he is a man embedded in politics and rivalries, and he gets exiled from his home city, and everything sucks for him. And he has this vision of a sort of redeemed Florence, like a Florence that could be better than the one that he's experienced. It can be so much more than it is right now, and some of that can happen, this side of paradise. Like, you could have a top of Mount Purgatory form of Florence if you had a good political savior. So maybe the Greyhound is a political savior. But then there's also the individual soul level. This is the Plato in me coming in, the city soul.
Yeah, it could be cultural.
And then you've got
too.
the afterlife. Yeah. So you've got all layers, I think. You've got the political application, absolutely. But then ultimately that points to the grander afterlife connotations where we all find fulfillment in God.
The reason I point out it could be also the cultural savior is because I think he focused more on the culture changing the politics than the politics changing the culture. Because, especially when we get into purgatory, he seems to show that politics changing the culture seems to be a very bad thing. So... we're a few cantos away from that, several weeks from now, but a little bit of foreshadowing for those who are watching this. He gets into this intrigue, and you were about to say something, Despy.
Yeah, no. What I was going to say is, I know this is going to sound very reductive, but what I was going to say is that it's an art piece. It's meant to elicit feelings. Like, that's the entire purpose of art. But the other thing is that he also went through a lot of shit. And getting those feelings out on paper sometimes makes you feel better. So
it may have been a form of catharsis as well as revenge.
Yeah.
Well, this is one of those times, one of the things that I've focused most on, whenever I do teach an AP Lit class, is Shakespeare sonnets. I've taught it many times. And this is one of those examples. That is one of those examples of where the author and the speaker are actually, the poet and the speaker are one and the same. That you can't really say that the speaker doesn't speak for the poet when you're reading those, because they're so personal and they're so fraught with genuine feeling, that there really is no separating the poet from the speaker. And I don't want to make that case for Dante, but I think to some degree there is some of Dante in Dante. I still do see more of a separation here than I do between the speaker in the Shakespeare sonnets. But Absolutely, I think it's fair to look at the things that Dante has gone through and see that reflected in the things that the fictional Dante is reflecting upon as he goes through his journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, because as I look through history, because as I am that nerd, I basically looked before Dante and after Dante, and I see the world as it changed. It's specifically in this region as the work disseminated out. A dramatic cultural shift away from the authority of the church on a cultural basis, theological basis, spiritual basis. All these things still held true, but to where you had more groups forming and fomenting a separation from their control on the cultural. Because again, it wasn't just Dante. It seems to have started around the same time as Dante. If it was not him, it was definitely one of his contemporaries. That this seems to then push towards the Enlightenment in latter centuries, because like those same groups, as you track their evolution throughout history, they become the groups that then become the leaders of the Enlightenment as it starts. And like, to me, that makes his work seminary almost to the humanist perspective of even Christian humanism, where the church is spiritual, but we need to worry about the cultural and humanist here, because we don't have that spiritual world here.
Well, certainly the Enlightenment happens because of the Renaissance to a large degree, and the Italian Renaissance is the earliest beginning of the Renaissance, and he is in the early years of the Renaissance.
Like I said, if it's not him, it's definitely one of his contemporaries in that same 20 to 23 year period. Because it's everybody. I have no problem with that characterization. Yeah, everything that seems to be within that 23-year period seems to be absent from the historical record beforehand, outside of a few platitudes and plays and things like this. It was not a cultural movement. And after that,
Eucharist. I mean, to me, that's not even a hot take, right? That's pretty much what the standard understanding of the Italian Renaissance to be, right?
Well, yeah, I think so.
Well, but I was looking at this from a non-biased lens of, well, where does the evidence lead me? Not what do the historians say, because the historians fucking argue like goddamn cats and dogs. I just want where the
evidence. Well, no, I'm talking about the consensus, not necessarily what any given historian says.
Well, and that's
this seems to be.
But even that, then we're relying on the appeal to authority and majority, the ad populum and ad authoritarium argument, and to me, the evidence shows this rather than what the historians are saying, because the historians add a bunch of other interpretations like, oh, it was this king's interpretation of Dante, or it was this, that, whereas we can literally point it to authors, cultural beacons, essentially, that become mimetic nodes of these thought processes that then proliferate and change the culture around them. So I was looking at...
Yeah, but I think the different scholars over time are also going to be presenting evidence, right? I think they typically do a lot of reading and I think that when a bunch of scholars agree on something, it doesn't mean that it's infallible, but it's certainly a good indication that there must be some reason to believe what they're saying.
Which is why I did the research. I didn't think that they were completely off base, but because every single one of them was looking at a slightly more complete but overall still incomplete puzzle. The modern historians don't talk about this. They talk about the consensus as opposed to this is what the evidence shows. And to me, that is an argument from authority and an argument from populace, to where this is what everybody agrees, but the evidence doesn't show certain things that is agreed within the consensus. That's why I say it's spread from here as a mimetic change from the nodes of the authors that learned and not copied, but were definitely inspired by Dante, what's his name, Kian and Caruso, are three I found very heavily listed in all these, where they all had this kind of mimetic teaching where people almost viewed them as a new school of thought. And that's why a lot of people view him as social commentary alone rather than intentional activism, But your point and Despy's point of vengeance and catharsis may actually mean it was intended as activism. And the evidence would seem to support that conclusion, whereas the historians aren't in consensus on that. See, that's why I try to go more for the evidence than the consensus. Because, while this is very good to think about, go with the consensus for the test, kids.
No, I think it's tough because
professors don't like being challenged.
Oh, that's true. I hate it. No, I actually love it when my students. I've had some students call me out on things, and I've learned some things. I actually enjoy it, but I think most of the professors I know are neurotic and narcissistic, and yes, I think one thing that makes it difficult for like people broadly, and then even specialist, I guess, historians to approach certain time periods is depending on your school of thought or your background, you might be coming at these things in ways that lead you to tamp down on or de-emphasize or rule out certain options, right? You could come from certain very dogmatic schools of thought that are sort of opposed to the idea that ideas actually sort of influence the course of history primarily, rather than being sort of formed in response to these other blah blah blahs. Like or there are people who are very skeptical of the sincerity of people's religious beliefs and how much that influences their arguments and writings and things like this, which I find very difficult.
Budge with the Egyptian histories had this kind of like blinders on, which is why most people no longer use his translations, is because you might think every theological case is a disguised power grab, right? Or perhaps some people actually believe this stuff and they write it sincerely. And I think this is a trap that some people do fall into with Dante as well, where there's the conspiratorial side, which, there are people who are like, look at his relationship with Avaro and the people who liked him and things like that, and take him to be far more skeptical, I think, than it's actually, let's say that it's actually warranted in believing that he was. Then there's
I won't say
evidence
he was.
Then there's evidence to support. Yeah, I can agree with that.
Because they just can't believe that somebody this smart, actually believed this stuff.
And I will point to them that
I think
by the way, to the apologists that are going to watch this, because I'm sure there's going to be some believers who are also apologists. If anybody ever says that dumb fucking shit to you from an atheist perspective, bring up Isaac Newton believed in fucking alchemy and he was a fucking genius too. Modernity, recency bias. This is you can ask Despy. This is one of my pet peeves that I get on people about, because we will perceive things from our modern lens, and to a point we need to go forward. But you cannot attribute modern interpretations to people who would not have even understood the foundational concepts of what that interpretation is based on. Despy brought up Greyhound. Yeah, that's right. That wouldn't have been the word. It would have been the Seleucus word that would have been used throughout history until Norris and English met up and created the word Greyhound, which comes from the word Norris Grey for bitch and hound for dog. It literally is a combination of an English and a Norris word that laterally created the word Greyhound. That word would have been changed, and we can use that for modern understanding and interpretation going forward. But we have to understand they viewed it different. This wasn't an Italian greyhound. This was an Iranian hound that was given to kings that then propagated down, so on and so forth. These things carried different significances, and therefore the words carried greater meanings than what we do today. This is why I push against the atheists and the anti-theists who will say, "Oh, he was a pure skeptic. This was him, telling everybody the church was full of shit." No, it wasn't.
This is why, as an atheist, I advocate for biblical studies in school.
I disagree with in school, but I do agree with studies.
No, I'm just saying, if you're going to be talking about historical time periods, especially those when we're talking about the Middle Ages, there is no way to literally historically understand the time period without understanding the Bible in some way, shape, or form.
Listen, I've taught the Book of Job in a secular classroom before, in a public school. No one has a problem with it. they would have a problem if I was proselytizing in the classroom. And I'm talking the school that I was in, we're a blue city, and everyone's very much in touch with the need for separation of church and state in the schools. But none of those coordinators had any problem with me teaching the Book of Job because of the way that I taught it.
Well, and here's my issue with it, because while I agree that you probably did everything right, because I know you and I know how you handle these things. I do not like it in public schools because it is the same thought process and talking point that has allowed now 3 different states to start using ICR, Answers in Genesis and Discovery Institute educational material, because I refuse to call that actual fucking educational material, in public schools. Because, we allow teachers to do this. This is why at least with public schools, I really believe in a full separation outside of contextual linking, like Despy is talking, where you have to for the time period.
Right, but when you're when you're teaching English, you're basically teaching criticism, like literary criticism, right? And criticizing the Bible is not a violation of church and state. Only teaching it non-critically.
Yeah, I'm just talking about the slippery slope that these people through the wedge document have now used, to where 3 states are violating that separation of church and state. And I have a very, by the way, your state's one of them. So
it was all the more important, I felt, that I do so, because if there was any risk of them getting, addressing this material from any other way, I wanted them to at least have the tools to be able to look at these works as literature.
No, and like I said, I'm sure you did everything right as far as how I would consider teaching it right, within context, as far as proselytizing or teaching it is literally true. But my problem is Florida, my current home state of Arkansas, and Texas all now allow Answers in Genesis and Discovery Institute educational materials in public schools. That is terrifying. Go watch some of that shit. Go watch what they said, for example.
Yeah, again, all of that, I mean, I live in Texas, so I totally get what you're saying. And I know a lot of districts that are really bad about this as well. But I think that's all the more reason. In fact, if I know people who've taught in these more conservative districts, and they will say that actually I would get in trouble for teaching the Book of Job, because I wouldn't be teaching it in the way a lot of fundamentalist parents would want me to teach it.
Yeah, and they flip out about it that way too, and that's my point.
Yeah,
it needs to
but that's why it's important for me to do.
Actually, we have a theologian. What is your take on this? Because I'm not opposed to the teaching. I am opposed to teaching of children. That's a whole nother conversation. But of at least within public schools, it not being taught because of this slippery slope. I mean, because we're seeing the outcome. I used to think, like Rich here, that as long as it's taught perfectly within context, everything's fine. It won't be a problem. And now, 40 years later, I'm seeing a bunch of states that are allowing stuff to be taught that is demonstrably untrue. We can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt this is untrue. And they're teaching it as truth. And that bothers me. I mean, how do you feel about it as somebody who is far more devout than myself?
Am I the theology person?
I'm
not a theologian. I'll disavow. I am not a theologian. I've studied theology, but I'm not a theologian. These are different things. Unless you subscribe to that.
Isn't your PhD in theology?
No, it's a political philosophy. But I mean, there's a lot of overlap with that. I mean, a lot of my study.
I thought it was in theology. My mistake.
No. Yeah, political theory, political philosophy. So mostly.
I think Prime said it was in theology, and I just ran with it from there, and I just never bothered to clarify with you. So that's my mistake.
No, that's okay. I mean, I have thoughts, but I might need more time to parse them than I have, because it looks like my wife is on the way home, and I should probably help her with the children when she arrives. So, I understand the fear of the slippery slope. I think we have for a long time sort of overcorrected in the other direction. I think there are a lot of things that people intuitively think of as violations of separation of church and state that are I don't think are or I would make a case should not be. I think that maybe the current jurisprudence supports it.
These three states are. That's all I can say for certain.
There's a good book if you're interested in this kind of thing, along the lines of what I'm thinking and why I'm being mildly hesitant. That just came out. It is by a Christian press, but it's by a very good historian. Now, again, he's at Hillsdale, so I'm sure you have particular feelings about him. But he's an exceptional historian. Miles Smith is the historian. He wrote a book called Religion and the Republic. It just came out from Davenant Institute published it. It's called Religion and Republic, and he makes a case that the antebellum period, which he makes is the whole the ratification of the Constitution until the Civil War, that's the full antebellum period. He says is characterized by what he's calling a kind of Christian institutionalism. There was a First Amendment disestablishment between the church and the state, but there was also a greater relationship between Christian institutions and the state and culture than most people today are comfortable with, in a way that he thinks is just sort of demonstrable historically and should at least inform the conversation that we're having. I think it's a very good book, and everyone should read it and then come away more informed about what we probably already think anyways.
Well,
what I was going to say...
He doesn't look too
good. What I was going to say to you, Jack, is that there's one universal truth, and that's retards are going to retard. So, I mean, I'd rather have it if retards are going to retard no matter what we do, at least have a chance at somebody doing it right.
Well, see, more my thing is because you remember you've heard stories of when I went to school and, the same time period Rich went to school. This stuff was taught then. But it was not taught with this fundamentalism and literalism within it, because that was considered an extremely fringe belief in this country up until very recently. How do we separate it now?
Even back then, I had science teachers tell me that I have to teach you this evolution stuff, but I don't believe it.
Yeah, I did too. It's just a theory. Fucking morons. But... My issue is they still taught it, and they taught it correctly. Even though they would say, "Oh, I don't believe this," they would still teach it. Whereas now that this other side is coming in, they are lying about the other side, the evolution, the science side of it, and that is the problem. How do we prevent that? Even let's say we go with the Eucharist and it is allowed. How do we prevent that from happening when we allow it?
No, this is my question for you first. Okay, so the lost cause theory has been in play for God knows how many years now. How exactly are you going to combat that?
As we have been for the past 250 years through separation of church and state on a secular basis, so much so that after our revolution and propagation of the process, we have seen 215 nations, some of them fall, but rise in the time period since we fucking have started the American experiment, trying to emulate this secular experiment because they see the benefits of removing the clergy from certain points of education.
But what I'm saying is how exactly are you going to get that out of the system with it, how heavily it's basically rooted in the system currently?
Won't be in my lifetime.
Right, but would you say that people teaching the correct history might be a good way to counteract that instead of trying to remove it entirely?
No, I agreed. That's why I said let's go with Eucharist idea that it's taught. How do we prevent the lies? That's all. If we're gonna go with the sunk cost fallacy of this is where it's gonna go, how do we prevent the lies of places like Answers in Genesis, the Institute for Creation Research, and Discovery Institute,
the Daughters of the Confederacy?
That shit too, yeah.
On that happy question and note, I think Desperado needs to go to bed, and
yeah, I know.
God damn it,
I actually have an out too.
You see this? They're running people. No.
Yeah, no, I put a pin in it. We'll see you for next time.
All right. All right.
We'll talk or whatever the next time we do this.
Yeah. This has been very fun. I appreciate it.
Yep.
I'm
thanks for hounding us to actually get this happening. I appreciate that too.
This is what I found being a producer for other people. If you don't hound people, you don't get shit done. Unfortunately, I got sick of hounding people who didn't want to get shit done and just started doing it myself.
There you go.
And thankfully, it ends up being more like this, where it's a salon-style conversation where we can have disagreements. statements, point out the evidence and historical relevance of these things, so that as people are watching this, they are getting, at least in my hope, a more broad and full interpretation of these passages we are reading, because that is important. Because depending on your professor, depending on your instructors in these type of classes that you're going to be learning about this, will depend on how they interpret these things and how you will have to answer these things. And when you see four people with very different approaches to this coming up with similar conclusions, you could then maybe start to identify these same kind of patterns within your instructors and the classes they're in. This is something that is valuable to understand as a student, because, well, I am one of those people. I do not like to say something as a definitive proof without the evidence to back it up. There's a lot of people who will do otherwise. You have to understand where this comes in, and most classes, they are going to come from a certain school of thought, and you have to fit within them or you're going to fail that class. They do not like to be told, oh, everything you're teaching us is wrong. Trust me, I've been kicked out of class several times for doing this to my teachers. It is not a good thing to do.
It's not conducive to getting a degree.
No. Well, or at least not to getting a resident or to getting a thesis advisor that you're going to like.
Well, the more charitable way to put it, or the way I put it sometimes is that you're proving that you understand your professor's perspective and can repeat it back to him. It doesn't mean that you necessarily buy it.
I love the charitability. I got to be the guy who's more realist about it, though, because there are certain things your professors who will teach you that is wrong. Even my fair Eucharist here. Because guess what? We all have our biases. We all have our blind spots. There are going to be things that I say that are wrong. Rich knows the example I like to use and won't bring it up because I don't want to bring modern politics into a conversation like this. But the second the evidence was shown to me that this was no longer true, I stopped using it. I am that guy. If you give me the evidence this isn't true, you will never hear me utter that phrase again.
Well, it's a little bit weird in my case because I'm a debate coach, right? So I give extra credit for disagreeing with you. But if I'm teaching AP Lit or something like that, I do want the people in that class to be able to repeat back to me what they've been taught. Now, if they want to go beyond that, after they've done that, then say why they have a different view, that's different. Like that, I accept, right?
Well, like
but you've got to be able to say to your professor what it is that professor taught to you, at least to show that you understand what you've been taught. But critical thinking allows you to then say, but after that here's
however or furthermore, extend it like we were doing here. For those of you that are using this for an educational purpose, like we're doing here, we all explained, well, this is what it's saying, this is what the experts say, and here's our interpretation. You have to do both. You cannot just go, no, you're wrong, here's right. That's not how this works. Especially not to something that is this multi-layered. Like, it's like when people do this, oh, there's only one way to interpret the Bible. You're fucking wrong. Otherwise, we would not have 44,000 Christian denominations on the planet.
Okay, so I think we do need to go at this point. Now I'm the third person who's got to go and out. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. See you whenever we set the next date. Can't wait.
Well, I'm planning for next Saturday, and we're just going to keep going from there as long as we can. May have to change the times, but to accommodate people. But this is going to be a long playlist for you people that are getting into this because we're going through all.
Well, summer is the time to do it for me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, honestly, even if we went 3 a week from now on, we're talking 33 weeks.
Yeah, sure.
Like, and there's some of these we're going to have to go one canto at a time because they just require that much explanation.
Yeah.
So, until next time.
All right.
Have a good one.